I am hopeful is because I actually don't think it's going to take as much as a lot of people think it will to beat it back. My concern is where they're going to look to do that. And I think a lot of people will look at it, a lot of people that, let's say, more on the conservative or even more of like the libertarian side, less the libertarians, more the conservatives, are like, well, if we just elect the right people.
Yeah.
Look, I'm an elected official. I'm not telling anybody politics isn't important. But, as we talked about at one point, if you were waiting around for a politician to preserve your liberties or to protect your family or to protect you, you're a failure. And I don't know how else to put it.
Yeah.
My job...
And get our act together before the giants show up. And they're like knocking at the door right now. So you better build your ark, folks, and get on your adventure, because we're whipping up some things in the lab that will make everything that's come so far look like nothing's happened at all yet. And that's not like next year, that's tomorrow, that's now. So we're going to have a lot of things to contend with.
For Richmond, Lord knows they all just wanna have total control. Wanna know what you think, wanna know what you do, and they don't think you know, but I know that you do. 'Cause your dollar ain't shit, and it's taxed to no end. 'Cause the rich men, 'cause the rich men.
Just can't leave. Apparently this is where I'm stuck.
Wow.
And that is what we have done to our adults now. They have these metaphorical ropes tied around, their legs, and they don't believe they can achieve anything more. And the travesty is they then have their own kids and they go, come here. Let me tie this rope around your leg for you. We've been convinced to do it to our own kids till we send them right back into the same things that we've always done, right? We send them right back into this schooling system that left us feeling inadequate, in terms of being able to educate our own kids. So we send them right back into that same system that left us feeling inadequate.
Yeah.
You can always break away. But every once in a while do it. Every once in a while set it down and go drink some fake tea. Right? Every once set it down and go wrestle with your little boy. And sometimes they'll say, well, do they even remember it? Does your 3-year-old ever remember when they're 16 that you sat there and had tea with them? No. But the 5-year-old version of them does remember what you did when they were 3. And then the 5-year-old builds additional bonds, and then the 10-year-old version of them remembers what you did when they were 5. And by the time they get to a teenager, it is muscle memory. You love them, you protect them, and they know it. Dang it, man. And so when you have to discipline them, they don't question why you're doing it. They know it's because you love them. When you have to set down rules, it's...
New variant is here. The next variant is coming. I'm going to speak in code. Those who know will understand. The new variant is here, and we're seeing all the pieces in place. We've gotten warning signs and leaks and disclosures from trusted individuals for a while now. It's time for you to prepare. What does that look like? First things first, this is going to be political cover. That's what they're using it for, and that's what they'll continue to use it for. You will see seismic shifts in the political system. You will see unbelievable shifts in the things that are happening in our country. But one thing is for sure, there will be an us and a them. It's unclear what everyone will look like and where the lines will be drawn. But it will be this simple. Those that comply and those that don't. During this next move, you will see an implementation of mandates, laws, restrictions. They will be much more swift and harsh because they'll know they have to be to get people to comply. They will be fast and effective at their intention, and they will employ the help of those that comply. For those that know, you'll know what I'm saying. You must distance yourself from those that comply. They are not your friends. They can no longer show up to Thanksgiving dinner. They are not healthy people to be around. In fact, They are dangerous. Those who comply are dangerous. They will become the brown shirts. They will be the ones to turn your family in. They will be the ones to tell them where you've hidden your children. This is not a game. We are about to go through a very, very dark time. And if you are not paying attention, if you are not awake by now, I don't think there's hope for you to wake up. At least not this time. Many people are going to be sucked into this. Many people are going to get duped again. But it's not going to be easy for anyone. Not for those that comply, and not for those who resist. No matter what, it's going to be difficult. So choose your difficult. You need to know your neighbors. You need to have as much land as humanly possible. You need to have all the tools in place. You need to be ready to go at a minute's notice. You need to know who's been red-pilled and who's been blue-pilled. In your community, in your family, in your friends. I wish it was simple. I wish there was something people could say or do and just wake everyone up at once. But I think we're past that. I don't think it's going to happen. I'm not saying we're outnumbered, but I am saying we are probably being outplayed. Unfortunately, because of the actions of past political leaders, we do not have the system in place, the resources, or the intention to make the changes necessary to protect our future. I'm all for political change, but to hope that political change will solve this problem is foolishness at this point. We had a chance for political change. We had a chance to shift the trajectory of this country. We've had many chances. And because those in charge are unwilling to do the very difficult work of dismantling the stranglehold on this country, because they're truly unwilling to risk their lives, unwilling to do what is necessary, we will suffer as a result. There isn't a good answer. We will probably lead down a very, very dark path in the future. I don't see light at the end of this tunnel. I don't. I only see a very dark season. This is not going to be an easy struggle. There will be geopolitical global upheaval in the scale we haven't seen ever, ever, in all the wars, in all of time. That's what we're moving towards. You cannot create a one-world government without somebody being in charge. When the people who want to be in charge have everything to gain and everything to lose. One of the biggest temptations that I think most people who understand what I'm saying are going to have is to sit in their prayer closet and do nothing. A lot of people are going to hope and wish and pray, and the lack of action is going to cost you your family. Now is not the time to hope and wish and pray. Now is the time to act. You must get up. You must go out. You must do the things necessary to feed and take care of your family. The time is short. Even now. Pay attention. It's time to act. Get to it. The next variant is coming.
or goals or objectives. And it has all the resources and technology, and they boast about how they get into the minds of infants. What they hear is already making them conditioned to the brand. And then you see, well, that's how people have been such fools in a way they've been taught to be fools. It's a value system disorder.
You know, if there is any testament to the plasticity of the human mind, if there is any proof to how malleable human thought is and how easily conditioned and guided people can become based on the nature of their environmental stimulus and what it reinforces, the world of commercial advertising is the proof. You have to stand in awe at the level of brainwashing, where these programmed robots known as consumers wander the landscape only to walk into a store and spend, say, $4,000 on a handbag that likely costs $10 to make in a sweatshop overseas, only for the brand status it supposedly represents in the culture. Or perhaps the ancient communal traditions which increase trust and cohesiveness in society, which have now been hijacked by acquisitive, materialistic values, where now annually we exchange useless crap a few times a year. And we might wonder why so many today have a compulsion to shopping and acquisition, when it is clear that they have been conditioned from childhood to expect material goods as a sign of their status with friends and family. The fact is, the foundation of any society are the values that support its operation. And our society, as it exists, can only operate if our values support the conspicuous consumption it requires to continue the market system. 75 years ago, consumption in America and much of the first world was half of what we see today per person. Today's new consumer culture has been manufactured and imposed due to the very real need for higher and higher levels of consumption. And this is why most corporations now spend more money on advertising than the actual process of product creation itself. They work diligently to create a false need for you to fill, and it happens to work.
You know, economists, in fact, not economists at all, they're propagandists of money value. And you'll find that all their models basically get down to token exchanges that are to the profit of one side or both sides or whatever, but they're completely disconnected from the actually existing world of reproduction.
In Ohio, an old man failed to pay his electric bill. You may be familiar with the case. And the electric company turned off the electricity and he died. The reason they turned it off was because it wouldn't have been profitable for them to keep it on because he didn't pay his bill. Do you believe that was right?
The responsibility really lies not on the electric company for turning it off, but on those of this man's neighbors and friends and associates who are not charitable enough to enable him as an individual to meet the electric bill.
Did I hear that right? Did he just say the death of a man caused by not having money was the responsibility of other people, or in effect charity? Well then, I guess we're going to need a whole lot of infomercials, little miserable coin slot donations for bodega counters, and a bunch of pickle jars for the billion people now starving to death on this planet because of the very system Milton Friedman promotes. Whether you are dealing with the philosophies of Milton Friedman, F.A. Hayek, John Maynard Keynes, Ludwig von Mises, or any other major market economist, the basis of rationale rarely leaves the money sequence. It is like a religion. Consumption analysis, stabilization policies, deficit spending, aggregate demand. It exists as a never-ending, self-referring, self-rationalizing circle of discourse, where universal human need, natural resources, or any form of physical life-supporting efficiency is ruled out by default, and replaced by the singular notion that humans seeking advantage over each other for money alone, motivated by their own narrow self-interest, will magically create a sustainable, healthy, balanced society.
There is no life coordinate in this whole theory, this whole doctrine. What are they doing? What are they doing? What they're doing is tracking money sequences. That's all it is tracking money sequences, presupposing everything that matters. One, that there's no life coordinates. Wow, no life coordinates. Two, that all the agents are self-maximizing preference seekers. That is, they think of nothing other than themselves and what they can get most for themselves. That's the notion, that's the ruling notion of rationality. Self-maximizing choice.
Solipsism.
Our garage.
If you make a law and say that you're not to steal food, they will steal food if that serves their family needs. Any law that's made by man that doesn't fit the circumstances of reality will be violated. If you make a law...
Garage, driving a Lexus into work at his 10-year job, and he finds out that his trophy wife is having an affair because she's bored. She's not satisfied with him at home. And it's maybe the 19-year-old, captain of the local high school football team or something. He's a senior, he's a star football player, right? In a job, yeah. She has a fling with him. Well, what if he decides I'm going to become buddy-buddy with my boy here after finding out about his wife's affair? And this kid, this punk, who's cheating on, my wife's cheating on me with, he knows nothing. He doesn't study the mind. He doesn't know anything even about himself. He watches TV 6 hours a day, plays violent video games, is obsessed with football, What kind of a number do you think that psychologist can do on that kid? Total number. That's the answer, exactly. That's right. He can do a total number on him. He can gain his confidence, he can get into his head, and I guarantee you give him a little bit of time, he can screw up his life based on what he knows and how he would be able to manipulate based on his hatred of that person. Well, guess what? That's the position humanity's in. We're that punk jock. And I'm not saying we necessarily did something to deserve it, but we're in that same position where the people with this knowledge at the highest levels, they hate us. And they're doing a total number on us because we don't have this knowledge. And until that changes, don't expect the playing field to be leveled. Expect it to get worse. Okay? The knowledge is hidden to create and maintain a power differential between those who hold it and those who are ignorant of it. It's that simple. The knowledge of natural law and its operations constitutes what I call the most deeply occulted or hidden information that exists on this planet. You will not find any more hidden information. This is the thing that all the distractions are there for, to keep you from learning. The endless trivialities, the nonsense you hear on the news, all the video games, all the nonsense television, the sports, it's all there to keep people from understanding this. I can't get you to accept that or believe it, and I don't ask you to believe it. I'm telling you, that's what they're trying to, from my years of being inside occult traditions that are very, very dark. I'm telling you, this is what they don't want you to know. From first-hand experience. How many people here today know that I was involved in the dark occult in my past? Good, great, okay. The powers that be want to seek to keep this information hidden from the people of the earth at all costs, because understanding this information about natural law will level the playing field and put an end to the currently entrenched systems of control that are operating on the earth.
Mind you, this is over 9 years ago that it was uploaded. Over a decade ago. These things were being discussed on the hotel at Yale, New Haven, Connecticut.
We should very clearly make a distinguishment between nescience and ignorance, so that people fully understand the difference between these two concepts. How many people even have heard the term nescience? Very few. This is a word that has practically been sanitized from colloquial English, practically been sanitized from the English language, and there's a reason for that too. There's two contexts to not knowing something. The first context is nescience. Okay? Nescience comes from the Latin. The prefix ne in Latin means not or not present or absent. Okay? And then scio, sciere in Latin means to know. It's where we get the word science from. Okay? So you put them together, and nescience, it actually, those two roots form another word, nesciere. Nesciere in Latin means not to know, to not understand. But there's a connotation to it. It means to not understand because the specific information that you may be having a desire to understand is completely absent. It is not present, and you cannot actually aggregate that information. You can't bring those pieces of grammar together to form the sentence. Okay? It's not present. Okay? So you don't have it at all. It's unattainable. This should be clearly delineated from ignorance. Now, nescience is not someone's fault. The information just isn't there. Okay? You can't be blamed for nescience. There's no blame in nescience. The person who is nescient is not to be blamed for being nescient. The information simply wasn't present so they could take it in and then come to understand it. Ignorance carries blame. This is another thing people want to think in the New Age movement. There's no such thing as nobody's to blame. And that goes to that there's no cause for anything that's happening, as you'll hear a lot in the New Age circles. Okay? I very strongly put down these notions, or attempt to. Okay? There are causes and effects. There are people who are responsible for what is happening. There is blame. Blame exists. Okay? There are people who are culpable. We're going to talk about moral culpability later. So ignorance has blame attached to it and responsibility attached to it. Okay? It comes from the Latin verb ignorare in Latin, and this means not to know, just like nescience means not to know, but in a completely different connotation. The connotation of ignorance means you don't know, even though necessary information is present and right there before you, because you have willfully refused or disregarded that information. Whether you refused it because it made you feel uncomfortable, or whether you disregarded it because you felt that's not important for me to know. I don't need to know that. Or you feel you already understand something that contradicts with what's, the new thing that you're hearing or seeing. Okay? So when you willfully disregard something, okay? If I wanted to willfully disregard the gentleman sitting in the front row, he's present. I could just pretend he's not here and ignore him. That's what ignoring is. This is why I try to say to people, the impact of the word is almost lost to us, of the word ignorance, because of the way it's pronounced. I tell people, start pronouncing it ignorance. Ignorance. Then people will hear the word ignore in it, and the connotation becomes clear. It means you're ignoring it. Ignorance. Okay? That's how I like to say it now, because the connotation is clear that way. The information is there, the truth is there, and somebody wants to ignore it completely. Now, that is inexcusable, and there is blame that is attached with that. So what I ask people all the time is, do we have a nescient society, or do we have an ignorant one? Do we have an ignorant one? Is our society ensconced in nescience, or is it ensconced in ignorance? I would argue absolutely that we are ensconced in ignorance in society, not nescience. I think we are drowning in information. I think we are drowning in the truth that is all around us, but people are ignoring it. Large.
And now we come to the great man himself, a man history records as being instrumental in the creation of America's public education system. Horace Mann was an American educator who served as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, part of the American Congress. Horace Mann was the key reformer of the education system at the time. In 1837, he became the head of the newly created Board of Education in Massachusetts, where he began the work that would eventually earn him the title as the father of American public education. After reading through the educational models of different countries, Mann finally hears about a particularly successful style that had been developed in Prussia, which is now modern-day Germany. The Prussian system had shown to be such a success for the government's purposes that, accompanied by a few other educators, Horace Mann travels to Germany to investigate. Upon their return to the United States, they lobbied heavily to have the Prussian model adopted. Interest in Prussia had also been growing in the northern half of the continent. Around this time, the Canadian superintendent of schools, Egerton Ryerson, traveled to Prussia in search of a new model of education. His journeys also included visiting Horace Mann in Massachusetts to further examine the system he would eventually adopt.
Undergraduates to understand how to break down a vision of the future into its constituent steps, and that's partly because we are stunningly bad at that in our culture. When I did some research into the history of the education system to find out why that was, because I thought, how the hell can we have an education system where I can have top-grade students who've been through 15 years of school, who've never been sat down once and told, write a vision for your character and your life. And I found out that the education system itself, which was based on the Prussian military model, was designed consciously by people who regarded themselves as fascists. This was in the late 1800s, who wanted to produce obedient workers who couldn't think for themselves. So, hey man, guess what? 150 years later, that's exactly what we've got. And it is a stunning fact that people aren't encouraged. Well, first of all, they're not encouraged at all. But second, specifically, they're not encouraged to take that time to dream and to say to themselves, look, okay, buddy.
Training elephants.
You can't always do it. You can't always break away. But every once in a while, do it. Every once in a while.
Everybody thinks that the country is falling apart. Nick, I don't think it matters what side of the aisle you're on. Everybody thinks that the country is falling apart. It's the first topic of discussion that gets brought up with everyone I talk to. Doesn't matter what their occupation is. Doesn't matter what side of the fence they're on. It's always what's happening to our country. And Green Berets I mean, you guys are the first in. You get in there, you develop a fighting force for the oppressed, and you're very familiar with how this stuff happens. So, how would you deconstruct?
And let me prove that to you.
Jocko Podcast number 291 with Echo Charles and me, Jocko Willink. Good evening, Echo. Good evening. Your responsibilities may involve the command of more traditional forces, but in less traditional roles. Men risking their lives not as combatants, but as instructors or advisors, or as symbols of our nation's commitments. The fact that the United States is not directly at war in these areas in no way diminishes the skill and the courage that will be required, the service to our country which is rendered, or the pain of the casualties which are suffered. To cite one final example of the range of responsibilities that will fall upon you, you may hold a position of command with our special forces, forces which are too unconventional to be called conventional, forces which are growing in number and importance and significance, for we now know that it is wholly misleading to call this the nuclear age, or to say that our security rests only on the doctrine of massive retaliation. Korea has not been the only battleground since the end of the Second World War. Men have fought and died in Malaya, Greece, the Philippines, Algeria, and Cuba, and Cyprus, and almost continuously on the Indo-Chinese peninsula. No nuclear weapons have been fired. No massive nuclear retaliation has been considered appropriate. This is another type of war, new in its intensity, ancient in its origin. War by guerrillas, subversives, insurgents, assassins. War by ambush instead of by combat, by infiltration instead of aggression. Seeking victory by eroding and exhausting the enemy instead of engaging him. It is a form of warfare uniquely adapted to what has strangely been called wars of liberation, to undermine the efforts of new and poor countries to maintain the freedom that they have finally achieved. It preys on economic unrest and ethnic conflicts. It requires in those situations where we must counter it. And these are the kinds of challenges that will be before us in the next decade if freedom is to be saved. A whole new kind of strategy, a wholly different kind of force, and therefore a new and wholly different kind of military training. And that right there was an excerpt from a speech by John F. Kennedy to the 1962 graduating class of West Point, the United States Military Academy. And that same year, he also released a message to the U.S. Army. And that message read, "To the United States Army, another military dimension, guerrilla warfare, has necessarily been added to the American profession of arms. The literal translation of guerrilla warfare, a little war, is hardly applicable to this ancient, but at the same time, modern threat. I note that the Army has several terms which describe the various facets of the current struggle: wars of subversion, covert aggression, and in broad professional terms, special warfare or unconventional warfare. By whatever name this militant challenge to freedom calls for an improvement and enlargement of our own development of techniques and tactics, communications and logistics to meet this threat. The mission of our armed forces, and especially the Army today, is to master these skills and techniques and to be able to help those who have the will to help themselves. Pure military skill is not enough. A full spectrum of military, paramilitary, and civil action must be blended to produce success. The enemy uses economic and political warfare, propaganda, and naked military aggression in an endless combination to oppose a free choice of government and suppress the rights of the individual by terror, by subversion, and by force of arms. To win in this struggle, our officers and men must understand and combine the political, economic, and civil actions with skilled military efforts in the execution of this mission. The Green Beret is again becoming a symbol of excellence, a badge of courage, a mark of distinction in the fight for freedom. I know the United States Army will live up to its reputation for imagination, resourcefulness, and spirit as we meet this challenge. Signed, John F. Kennedy.
Deconstruct and demoralize a nation.
I think a lot of it has to do with, I think in the simplest terms, it's an identity crisis. Why do people fight for a nation? What does it even mean to be a part of a nation? It's generally you have a shared cultural, shared experiences, shared icons. You have all of those things which build some sort of connection to the past and then association with everybody else. So that even if you disagree on various things, there's still unifying components within your culture that you can both hearken back to and look on with a certain element of pride, but that also are important for developing traditions. There's an interesting quote. I think the person's name was Bell, and he gave a definition of culture. He goes, "What is it?" He goes, "It's society's attempt to come up with a coherent set of answers to the existential questions we face throughout our lives." If you think about that it kind of works. Culture is it's not just skin color. It's not race. It's not food or dress or it's kind of it can be all of those things. But it really comes down to fundamental questions that how does a group of people that have individual objectives for their life, different preferences and whatnot, but how do they live in society with one another where they can cooperate in order to achieve something? And at other times, leave each other alone when they disagree, but still feel a sense of unity, camaraderie, and connection. So how do you break that apart? Well, you have to challenge the overall narrative, both of the history, like how did you get to where you are today? Because if you take pride in it, well, then it's something worth preserving. And even if you think that there's a problem with it, you might want to fix those problems. So, perfect example within U.S. history would be if you view U.S. history through the lens, the philosophy of the Declaration of Independence. We believe, we find these truths self-evident that all men are created equal and that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, you can look back and say, we didn't live up to that. Some people might even say we're still not totally living up to it the way that we should, which is maybe why in the preamble of the Constitution it says to create a more perfect union. It's because we recognize. But that sentiment is, I believe, true and noble. That you're endowed by your Creator, that the rights that you have are not just preferences or gifts that the government gives you, that there's certain rights that are inherent about being a human being, that we are created equal, and that, again, we're endowed by our Creator, unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, not the provision of it, the pursuit of happiness. That is a pretty strong, I believe, that's a pretty strong philosophy to build a culture around. But what if I come back later and I tell you that, yeah, that sounds really nice, but the guy that wrote it was just a slave owner? In fact, all these people that, were trying to set up liberty, they just wanted liberty for white men because women couldn't vote at the time. And you know what? They just really didn't want to pay their taxes. That's what this was really about. So what do you have? You have a white patriarchal society that was rooted in enslaving certain people based off of the color of their skin. And they set up this system because it would be beneficial for them financially. And all of your other ideas or notions about what a wonderful philosophical concept this was, that was marketing. That was marketing to help rich white guys get what they want at the expense of other people. That's all it was. Well, right at the bat, right at the get-go, I've completely undermined why you would want to fight for such a culture in the first place. So once I start undermining the cultural ties that bind, now let's admit a couple of things. We can look back and say there are elements of that statement that are true. But then all of a sudden, when we put it back in context and we recognize, well, wait a second, every society at the world at that time had some form of institution of slavery. Every single society at that time, had some of the bad things, the negative aspects of it that we just discussed. So what was different? Well, what was different was what they were actually rapidly expanding the concept of liberty and suggesting who it should apply to. I mean, to say in 1776, after thousands upon thousands of years of history that were rooted in, racially based discrimination, that were rooted in a political elite controlling everything, you now have somebody say, no, we're all created equal. And even if we're not living up to it, that is the standard, that's the truth. That was revolutionary. That's incredible. And it's easy to look back now, 200 plus years later, and say, well, of course that's the way it's supposed to be. It wasn't of course back then. They fought for that. They died for that. They might not have fully lived up to it, but they set us on the path to be able to achieve a level of individual liberty, prosperity, and security that is unheard of in world history. But But if I erase all that, and I view it purely from this lens without any context, I can convince you, especially if you're a younger person, I can convince you that this is all bad, especially if you can still look around at society and find certain inequities, right? There are certain disparities of outcome. Well, some disparities of outcome exist because of bad policy. Some disparities of outcome exist because you're lazy and that dude works hard. That's not an injustice.
Yeah.
It's not an injustice that the guy, working super hard in a high demand field makes more money than the person that isn't doing those things. But if I can convince you that it actually is injustice, well, what am I doing? I've taken away your shared history. I've taken away your shared connection with your neighbor. And now I'm supplanting that with a different narrative. And that narrative has to be rooted on who do I need to be fighting with the people in power. And that's where I can come up with the whole system of oppressed, oppressor. You're the person that the entire system is stacked against. I'm going to essentially galvanize your support, and I'm going to point you at an enemy, real or imagined. And I'm going to give you a new narrative, because I can't just say the old narrative is bad. I got to replace it with a new one. So I give you a new narrative, and I make that the narrative worth fighting for, because now your entire identity is caught up in that narrative. Your entire identity is caught up in that movement. Because I haven't left you with anything else, right? Because your nuclear family, that's a tool of the patriarchy, right? Your country, that's just racist, bigoted, and discriminating, right? Your very identity, well, I don't know, if you are a certain skin color or, you're heterosexual or whatever else, well, you're part of the oppressor class. How do I get you how do I move you from the oppressor class into an ally class or the oppressed who are the good guys? Well, you have to change the nature of your identity. What if it doesn't correspond with reality? What objective reality? Postmodernism tells us there is no objective reality. There is no objective truth. There is only lived experience. There's only oppressor and oppressed. And if you're an oppressor, you're a bad guy that needs to be taken down, and there's nothing you can do, right? It's as my friend Christian puts it, it's the original sin theory with no redemption. I do all of those things, and now I have a very powerful group of very disaffected people that have a philosophy rooted in nothing other than the movement.
Yeah.
And at that point, now it's just to run through the cultural institutions. It's everything Gramsci talked about in Italy in the 1930s. It's the idea of looking at the institutions which form culture. And we tend to look toward politics, but politics is downstream from culture. The real culturally shaping institutions are your school system, your academia, media, the arts and entertainment, Hollywood. They're the ones that are actually telling you the stories about who you are, what your country is, and everything else. And if they've all decided on a particular narrative, and that narrative is rooted in the United States, largely in postmodernism, deconstructionism, critical theory, and now all of a sudden your feet are firmly planted in nothing, well then that identity crisis provides me a huge opportunity to be able to destabilize what it is and replace it with what I want it to be.
How do you think all these academia, the school system, Hollywood, and media, how do they all wind up on the same narrative?
I think the overly simplistic answer is the Yuri Bezmenov answer. And Yuri Bezmenov was a former, he wasn't a KGB agent. He actually worked kind of in journalism, and he arranged a lot of these junkets for foreign diplomats and foreign journalists to come into the USSR at the time and write positive stories. But he essentially worked with the KGB. And he talked about a system called active measures. And this is something we know, it's not conspiracy theory. The KGB involved themselves in active measures, which were attempts to destabilize foreign countries in order to make them more friendly to Marxism, and specifically the USSR. Now, you could argue, well, hasn't the United States also tried to do that in order to get people closer to them? It's a little bit different with respect to how it was done, but in certain cases, it could be, there could be similarities, or there are similarities. I don't think that's wrong in the sense that it didn't happen. We know it happened. We know that the Soviet Union worked very, very hard on infiltrating into areas of academia and the arts and entertainment because they realized they were culturally shaping institutions. Fidel Castro once said, he was invited to go speak at Harvard. He once said, he goes, you don't find the radicals in the labor unions, you find them in the schools. So we know that took place. The other thing that I think took place, and this was something that Gramsci wrote about, which Gramsci was an Italian socialist who was jailed by Mussolini, who had also been an Italian socialist before he became a fascist. But one of the things they talked about was that when Marx first started talking about his concept of revolution and workers of the world unite, his idea was that people generally saw themselves as being economic entities. So the primary kind of individual identity was rooted in your economic class. And he actually believed that a nation had to go through capitalism before it could get to communism. What they found out in practice is it never worked that way. It wasn't the Western capitalist countries and democracies that embraced Marxism. It was feudal Russia. It was Tsarist Russia. And they started to recognize, and Gramsci writes a lot about this, where he talks about the march through the institutions, or that's what it's become dubbed. And it was this idea that it's not good enough to simply say, hey, you workers of the world unite, because honestly, on a pound for pound basis, workers in the West and within predominantly free market economies tend to be doing better than in these other places. He goes, it's the entire culture that has to be changed. So if you look at it from the standpoint of you had a ready-made philosophy with Marxism and critical theory, which has a very different, people look at that as almost a purely economic, people who don't really follow it look at it as almost a purely economic theory. It's not. It's an entire social theory. There's a reason why it's hostile to God, it's hostile to the individual family, it's hostile to everything that is we generally think of as being rooted in Western free market representative.
Like I said,
if you just look at this one playlist I made 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago, with all the evidence for you to find yourself, from Carrie Mullis, the creator and inventor of the DeVoc 19 test, to Jesse Ventura speaking at Google, talking about the media, selling the news, to Joe Rogan, talking about the social dilemma, to the family, talking about Donald Trump, Caring Corrupted, killing nurses of the Third Reich, the Prussian model that created the Holocaust. Right down to Yuri Bezmenov teaching 3 generations about Marxism without the counterbalance of American patriotism. And what do you have? So, back in 2011, at Levy Economics Institute of Bard College.
Take it further. She said, we're worried about Bernie Sanders. I said, and millions of Americans don't care that the man has the word socialist attached to him. He can run for office. 9 months ago, a very high official of the Democratic Party had a conversation with me. And in that conversation, she said, that's a hint. She said, I can't go further than that, but some of you can take it further. She said, we're worried about Bernie Sanders. I said, really? Why? Well, we figure he's going to get 1 to 3% of the vote in the primaries. I said, and why is that worrisome? Because as she explained to me, there are a number of states where if he does that and the people who support him don't then vote for Mrs. Clinton, those states are close.
Oh, I thought he couldn't say who it was. See how he just slips that in there?
States, and they could swing. 1 to 3% can make the difference. And the notion that Mr. Sanders would not be limited to 1 to 3% of the vote, that he wouldn't be a fringe candidate, a position candidate, a protest candidate, but would be a serious threat, never dawned on them. So deeply in touch is the Democratic Party with the sentiment of the American people that they had no clue. So socialism is coming back. It's going to come back bigger and harder than most folks expect, since most of the repression was the repression of something that didn't go away just because you pretended not to see it. So it's coming back. Let me make it personal one more step.
Let me make it personal one more step. So this is personal to him.
I retired as a professor at UMass in end of 2008. And now I'm much busier than I ever was as a professor. I run around the country talking about what's wrong with capitalism. I can't possibly fulfill all the invitations. I limit myself to 3 trips a month across the United States. I'm now going to list for you where I've spoken in the last 4 months.
So let's think about this. He said he retired in 2008. So he's no longer teaching. So he's been teaching for, we gotta at least think 30 years at least. And now that he's retired, he's traveling across the country, still teaching it. Who's paying him to do that?
In each case, I'm only going to list audiences that were at least 300 people. Okay, here we go. Tampa, Florida, St. Petersburg, Florida, Houston, Texas, Ames, Iowa, Seattle and Bellingham, Washington, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Berkeley, Fresno, Boston, Syracuse, and Ithaca. That's just to get you to get a feeling for the crisscrossing of the country that I now do. I'm always asked to talk about what's wrong with capitalism. This never happened before in my life. Something is fundamentally shifting in the United States. The reason I tell you all this is because you may not feel it quite here. That's nobody's fault. That's the way these things are. They develop unevenly. But you should be aware from someone like me that all of this is going on. I live in Manhattan. Once or twice a day, I am picked up by a limousine in front of my house. My neighbors think I am something very important.
So once or twice a day, some limousine picks him up, and his neighbor thinks he's something important. So, who's picking him up in the limousine? Who's paying for it?
And I'm whisked off to a television studio somewhere where I give interviews. In that way, I can talk to millions of people.
Millions of people. You hear how he changes his voice when he says that? Isn't that interesting?
And the interviews are always about the same thing, which is, tell us about what's wrong with capitalism. Most of the time, that's what they ask me to do.
Most of the time, that's what they ask him to do. And he's just so gleefully willing to do it. Because he isn't doing it for free. Somebody's got to pay for that limousine. Somebody's got to pay for his time. But he doesn't like capitalism. Isn't that interesting?
Okay. I've done interviews with Bill Maher on that late night comedy show that I'm sure some of you watch.
Keep this in mind. Bill Maher.
He chose. I didn't. He chose.
He chose. I didn't. He chose.
And what he talked to me about, I did the opening monologue, lasts about 9 minutes when he interviews someone at the beginning of his program. He chose the topic Marxism.
Marxism.
So he and I discussed Marxism for 10 million people or whatever it is that watches. The best interviews I've done in the last 2 or 3 years have been with Bill Moyers. I did 3 of those. I've also done Up with Chris Hayes. These are things that didn't used to happen in the United States because a person who's a critic of capitalism, which I am.
Which I am, even though I'm getting paid to travel the world now as I'm retired, making more money than I did as a professor.
A person who acknowledges with appreciation all that one learns from Karl Marx, which I do.
Which I do.
So be careful, sir, some of you. Don't tell your parents that you came to this session because it might upset them. I hope I'm kidding.
Don't tell your parents because it might upset them. I hope I'm kidding. Isn't that interesting? So everything I just showed you is right there in front of your face, and you still don't get it. Now, just 2 weeks ago, Joe had Bill Maher on. And let's see what he's asking him.
Russian defector Yuri Bezmenov, he detailed the Soviet Union's plan for the moral decay of the United States by introducing Marxists and Leninism into school. Marxism and Leninism into school. Marxist and Leninist ideas. And that these would be ingrained in younger people, and then they would go into the workforce, and then they would slowly but surely ruin the society through this. And it's a fascinating conversation because it's in 1984 that he's talking about this.
Wow. What a perfect year to talk about it.
What a perfect year to talk about it.
Yeah.
I think it was 84. Is in the 80s for sure. But it's a fascinating... You've never seen it?
No.
You should watch it.
I've never heard of this.
This guy. What's his name? Former KGB agent named Yuri Alexandrovich Bezmenov claimed in 1984 that Russia had a long-term goal of ideologically subverting the U.S. He described the process as a great brainwashing that has 4 basic stages. The first stage, he said, is called demoralization, which would take about 20 years to achieve. It's really fascinating. When you hear him talk, it's fascinating because that's exactly what they did.
But I don't know if they did it. I think it's definitely been done. But did it come from Russia? And how did it come from Russia?
Well, he'll explain it. He used the example of the 1960s hippies coming to the positions of power in the 1980s in government and businesses in America. Bezmenov claimed this generation was already contaminated by Marxist-Leninist values. Of course, this claim that many baby boomers are somehow espousing KGB-tainted ideas is hard to believe, but Bezmenov's larger point addressed why people who have been gradually demoralized are unable to understand that this has happened to them. Referring to such people, Bezmenov said, they are programmed to think and react to certain stimuli in a certain pattern. You cannot change their mind, even if you expose them to authentic information. If you prove that white is black and black is black, you still cannot change the basic perception and logic of behavior. Demoralization is a process that is irreversible. Bezmenov actually thought back in '84 that the process of demoralizing America was already completed. It would take another generation and another couple of decades, here we are, to get the people to think differently and return to their...
Here we are, as he added in there.
Patriotic American values, claimed the agent. In what is perhaps the most striking passage in the interview, Bezmenov described the state of a demoralized person. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who is demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him a concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he has a kick in his fan bottom. When a military boot crashes his balls, then he will understand. But not before that. That's the tragedy of the situation of demoralization.
I still don't understand how this got from Russia into us.
He explains it in the interview. It's a long interview.
Because
he explains what they did and how they...
It's certainly possible because, colleges have become so left-wing. There's no diversity on college campuses.
Yeah, none.
Especially the elite schools,
right?
Which turn out the people who then control the media.
Yeah.
They're the ones who go into the places, organs of government, organs of media, that are most influential in our society.
Yeah.
So it's coming from, and of course, they teach Marx. Andrew Sullivan wrote a great piece about this about 6 months ago. They teach, Karl Marx is one of the most taught economists in all these elite colleges. And of course, a lot of what Karl Marx was about would never pass muster with anyone who's woke. He was a horrible racist. He very few of his beliefs were something that they would countenance today. Same thing with Che Guevara.
Right.
Terrible person.
Well, he had the look, though.
He looks great on a
Che
T-shirt.
Guevara posters and T-shirts.
T-shirts.
Yeah.
They think these people are heroes.
Yeah.
And sadly, because colleges turn out nothing but America-hating hysterics these days, ignorant, just ahistorical students who are not taught any of the things I used to be taught of in school, partly because we had the sin of learning what white people did. You know, I mean, I'm sorry, but John Stuart Mill was white. He had some good ideas. But, you know, Shakespeare, you know, it's okay to, you know, you can be anti-racist and still study some great white people. But, you know, some of that is just outre on college campuses these days.
Years. It's that Russia and racism and misinformation and like all of this stuff. But I do think in a lot of ways it was a concerted effort. You ever see that that cartoon, which it's like a banker in like his corner office, and outside his window is all the Occupy Wall Street people protesting, and he's on the phone and he says, "Introduce them to identity politics." You know, like I'm not saying, I don't know if it went down exactly that way, but I think that cartoon's getting at something. Like I think there's a reason. I just don't.
Do you think the government is that competent that they could brilliantly socially engineer civilization that way?
I think a lot of the private interests that own our government are pretty competent, actually. You know, I think the government works in very sloppy ways, but if you look at it from the perspective of, say, like, you know, Lockheed Martin and Pfizer and companies making, you know, hundreds of billions of dollars in profits, they're actually working very well. You know, like the system's working very well toward that end. And I just don't think it was completely organic that after we had these disastrous wars and a financial crisis, and after you had the Tea Party and the Occupy Wall Street movement, that all of a sudden on some grassroots level, we were like, we need to have a national conversation about chicks with dicks. Yeah. Like, I don't think that just happened. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think that's like, every day that's what we got to talk about now. That's the new thing.
What is the gentleman's
beautiful
name from
trans
Russia?
women. I'm sorry.
The guy who used to work for the KGB, Yuri.
Yes, I know you're talking about.
What was his last name? Jamie Bentonov.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Who gave the like lectures on how the Soviet Union was destroying America in the next generation?
And he talked about this in 1984.
Mm-hmm.
This was during the Soviet Union time. Yuri Bezmenov.
Yep, that's him.
Yuri Bezmenov gave a speech describing exactly America in 2023, describing how Russia had eroded, the Soviet Union had eroded all of our institutions and gotten in there and implanted ideas of Marxism and reinforced these ideas, and that this was undoubtedly going to lead to the demise of America.
There's
the way he lays it out.
It's compelling, and there's definitely a lot of things that kind of happened exactly like he said they would happen.
Yeah.
And it's not, you know, it's kind of evolved. It's not really, like, traditional Marxism is kind of dead. No one's really advocating for, like, government ownership of the means of production. It's more now, it's just kind of like, it's really like corporate control of government with this weird, like what they call cultural Marxism, which I don't like the term because it means different things to so many different people. But the idea that like Marx had this economic view that everything, all of human history was a class struggle between like the oppressor class and the oppressed class. And if you like applied that to cultural issues, it's like describes wokeism to a T.
Yeah.
That everything can be reduced to like white, black, straight, gay, cis, trans, men, women. Like it's like everything is like the oppressor class versus the oppressed.
Yes.
Which is such a shallow, stupid way of analyzing any.
Now let me show you something else.
However, to have a job in Germany, a nurse had to belong to one of several nursing organizations. There were 5 organizations for nurses. Among these, the National Socialist Nurses and the Red Cross Nurses swore an oath of allegiance to Hitler. Additionally, the Protestant Nurses Organization said that it greets National Socialism with an open heart.
Surprisingly, more physicians, percentage-wise, joined the Nazi Party than the population in general. And I think physicians were very taken with the fact that we can use our science to improve the human race.
Many physicians and nurses enthusiastically supported the Nazi regime and were involved in all aspects of the Holocaust.
About 40% of German physicians were in the Nazi Party, while the lawyers and teachers and the other white-collar professions joined in much lesser numbers. If you didn't join the Nazi Party, there was no retribution.
Using inflammatory propaganda, Hitler and the Nazis began a campaign against the Jews.
And I know that my father used to say that bad things are happening to Jewish people in Germany. They're being discriminated against. Jewish children can no longer go to their regular school. People cannot keep their jobs at the university or other professions. Hitler said, follow me, never mind God, never mind religion. Just follow me, do what I am asking you to do.
And since the regime was totalitarian, and they were very good at public campaigns and propaganda, and they had enough scientists and physicians that were already marching to the drum.
Propaganda is an extremely powerful way to convince people to their way of thinking.
Germany's medical establishment began to support the Nazi Party, except for Jewish doctors, who were ostracized.
The official journal of the German Medical Association started to have a swastika on their journal, and they got rid of all the Jewish physicians, authors, people in office of all the different associations and societies very quickly. And in 5 or 6 years, they got them out of all the academic and professional establishment.
After years of strong Nazi propaganda, Germany's doctors and nurses began to accept the belief that racial hygiene would be good for the nation.
Social Darwinism said we need to eliminate these inferior people that were handicapped, that were maybe mentally disturbed. We want a healthy, thriving society.
In Germany, the proponents of the eugenic movement were the most prominent, the most powerful. The establishment, the legal system became Nazified immediately.
Well, of course, it required lawyers, it required doctors, it required bureaucrats, it required administrators, but many of the nurses were the ones who actually carried out the injections. But for a long time, nurses were the agents of the physicians, and the physicians in the Nazi period were agents of the state. So that's very important, because physicians were no longer asked to care for patients, but to care for the state, the folk, the German folk. And so what was good for the state was what was important, not what was good for an individual patient.
Obedience was still very much a part of the way nurses were taught and the way we thought. So it's not surprising that the nurses in the Nazi era got caught up in all this.
Euthanasia programs were established in Nazi Germany in which children and adults were killed if they were considered unfit for life and were a burden on the state. The true meaning of euthanasia would be the mercy killing of a person with their permission or their request. However, this was not the case in Nazi Germany. These killings were without consent. They were murders. In the 1920s, German lawyer Karl Binding and German psychiatrist Alfred Hoche co-authored the book The Permission to Destroy Life Unworthy of Life. This book greatly influenced Hitler's thinking about euthanasia.
Everybody had that propaganda thrown at them. It was common. It was everywhere, and it espoused the idea that people who were in some way deficient should be killed, so that they didn't carry on the defective genes, and so that they weren't a burden on the state. So the nurses, just as everybody else in society, were susceptible to this. The nurses were working in hospitals where children with disabilities, people with mental illnesses, a whole range of conditions were cared for. They weren't coerced into becoming part of these programs.
Once you accept humans can be humanized, eventually you can engage in exterminating it. And this was a gradual and very powerful and unfortunately very effective process that took place in Germany.
The Nazi euthanasia program first started in 1939 as a means to eliminate handicapped children.
You have families who, because of all the propaganda, are believing that to have a child with negative traits is a bad thing. It's bad for the health of Germany.
They were killing children with disabilities, children with Down syndrome, children with cardiac anomalies, children with cerebral palsy, children who didn't develop normally, who were considered to be useless feeders. That was the term used.
Public health nurses would go to the families, promise them, if you will give your child to us,
your child will get the best care. And so people were falsely led to believe that and relinquish their children. The nurses were involved in the killing of children by giving them overdoses, by taking them outside knowing that it was going to contribute to their death.
I got very interested in this when I found out that nurses actively killed their patients, and I became intrigued into how they could come to believe that killing was a legitimate part of their caring role, which they did. The propaganda around the whole idea of killing people for the good of the state was profound, even down to children doing exercises in their school books on how much it costs to keep people with a disability, for example.
Midwives and physicians were mandated by German law to report any infant born with a birth defect, and the infant would be placed in an institution. Midwives were paid for each birth that they reported.
Midwives were licensed. They had to go through a similar training period as nursing, and many of them were independent practitioners. So not long after the child was put into a home, he or she would then be moved to another institution further away. Of course, there was no consent, no nothing. These killings were done without the parents' approval, more or less, in the main.
The nurses and the midwives who were involved in the carrying out, and maybe not even the ideology, but were actually the doers of the euthanasia program. Euthanasia is really a euphemism for murder because these were not terminally ill patients. These were children that were taken and murdered, mostly children who had handicap or mental retardation.
I think one deciding point is in Germany, the notion that the health of the public is more important than the health of the individual. So consequently, to remove an unhealthy element was seen as good.
In September 1939, a decision was made to develop an adult euthanasia program for patients in psychiatric facilities. Hitler picked the date to coincide with Germany's invasion of Poland.
To expand it to include adults, the only way we're going to make this acceptable is to say we need these hospital beds for the war wounded. Why should the state pay to keep totally disabled people alive when our young guys are sent to the front, need to come back home and have care?
The name of this killing organization was T4. Eventually, 6 killing centers were established. Medical staffs were ordered to fill out questionnaires to evaluate whether their patients should live or die. Patients were placed in gas chambers that looked like showers. Then lethal.
So there you go. There you go.
For them, assisted suicide.
With these new developments, could the world see another era of unethical medical practices and experiments?
You know, after the Holocaust, the motto was never again should a Holocaust happen.
I think the lesson we have learned from the Nazi era and the Holocaust is that we are all vulnerable to outside pressures, influences, and that things can happen that we may not see at the time, that things are going awry. And that's why we have to all be on our guard, and we have to monitor ourselves. We have to monitor each other because the healthcare environment is very challenging.
A couple of takeaways from what we learned about the nurses in the Holocaust. I think the first one is how easy it is to become involved, especially in the beginning. How easy was it for those nurses just to take a patient to a special room? They didn't know what the room was for. They were simply taking a patient to a special room. How long did it take them to actually find out that every patient who went to that room did not come out alive? That could take quite a long period of time. Once you've started doing that, then maybe you're asked to help give a patient medication. So slowly the nurses could have gotten involved and not even known what they were doing.
Learning about the Holocaust is a very powerful way to learn empathy and compassion.
Only by educating people that we must learn to live in peace and harmony with each other, regardless of color of the skin or background or economic situation and so on.
But the question, of course, is how did one of the most advanced societies, advanced in art, music, theater, writing, medicine, was, you weren't a real doctor in the U.S. unless you went to Germany to study, and then you came back and said, you know, I studied in Germany. And so it was the height of technology, the height of science. How was it possible that these people became murderers?
It's easy to believe the Holocaust could never be repeated. The factors leading up to it are not unique to Germany. They are human factors that are present in every country, every culture, and every generation. If it could happen in one of the most advanced societies in human history, it can happen again anywhere.
If it happened in Germany, then it can happen anywhere else. So we must be very, very vigilant.
It's up to each of us to learn from the past and be ready to interrupt the forces that may try to exploit the few for the benefit of the majority.
That's a fact, folks.
Where I was on the bleeding edge. I'll give credit to people like you who were ahead on spotting the risks of the COVID policies on vaccines in particular.
Yeah,
We just got to be right to move it forward, though.
I didn't even finish college. I mean, I'm not stupid. I dropped out to pursue my career. But in general, I believe it was a third grade math equation, a lot of this stuff. So why do you think I was able to figure it out, but not you, not Trump? I believe it was because at the time you were working in the biotech pharmaceutical industry. So that's what you were doing. You were focused on sucking up money, advancing your company. You weren't really concerned with what we were dealing with or the truth about it. Because if I can do it with a calculator, I think you could have done it or Trump could have done it. But Trump hired Alex Azar, a pharmacy executive lobbyist. Trump took $1 million from Pfizer. Trump had meetings with Bill Gates in 2018 where Bill Gates told him about modernizing flu vaccines. And in 2019, before the pandemic, Trump passed an executive order for that. So I don't think that I'm so smart that I just had the foresight. I think that I actually care. And Trump was being a politician that I believe sold out to Big Pharma. And I think you were working with Big Pharma. So I don't think I had insight. I just think you care now because you're running for president.
No, I mean, I think everybody wears their different hats and has their perspectives of what they're focused on. I was in the middle of writing Woke Inc., which is my first book. I was not writing a book about the lockdown policy, so where I was going deep was on the woke industrial complex as it related to corporate America. Keep in mind, I had just stepped down from my job as a biotech CEO precisely because I had to make statements or on behalf of Black Lives Matter, as every biotech CEO was browbeaten to do. I refused to do it. And yes, I have made sacrifices to advance my own convictions. That was a real trade-off. You take a big trade-off, but you want to speak your mind openly. That was the area where I was most focused at the time, but paying attention to what was going on because I wasn't a policymaker. But all I would say is, you're right. Your criticisms of me, your criticisms of Trump, be even-handed. I mean, Ron DeSantis has called called Fauci during that period, and I respect him for changing his mind, but called him a really, really, really good job and really, really good ally. Every Republican politician who's running for office has made some cringeworthy statements about COVID and should be held to account for it. Right. For my part, I'm willing to be man enough to actually say it. And I wish that other people should too. And the only way we're going to do is by setting an example. So I'm not perfect. I'm going to say that honestly.
I'm even-handed on it, I promise you. I want to say too, you stepped down as a chairman in 2023 from your pharmaceutical company, right? In 2023?
Right before I ran for president is when I stepped off the board. I stepped down as CEO in January of 2021.
Okay, but you were on the board in 2023, right? Before you
I was one of the 10 board members or so.
Yeah, and in 2022, your company partnered with Pfizer to create a new company, correct?
Yeah, the whole business model of the company I founded was to pick up drugs that other companies had abandoned or left behind. And so there's one deal of some drug that Pfizer was developing that Roivant took over some rights to. I was on the board, not involved with it. But, there was a separate deal that the company had done with Pfizer longer ago, back when I was CEO too. It's probably about 200 deals the company has done. It's a licensing business. And so that's exactly how it worked.
Yeah, not my favorite company, but I understand that's
not mine either. Not mine either.
Feel free to watch the whole interview if you want to see more.
We're taking things that are, genetically modified organisms, and we're injecting them in little kids' arms. We just shoot them right into the vein.
Gates' business strategies came under fire in 1998 when the United States Department of Justice sued Microsoft for antitrust violations.
This is tape 3 of the videotape deposition of Bill Gates.
During the 18-month trial, Gates gave hours of videotape testimony.
What were the non-Microsoft browsers that you were concerned about?
Mother Nature gave
3 years ago, just before the pandemic.
Something that's richer than our imagination.
We saw a very peculiar pattern.
Which means it had to be created pre-2019, which means everybody involved in it were very much aware of what's being discussed.
I've never seen anything like this before.
I remember him saying, remember this word, CRISPR.
We've never had the ability to change the fundamental chemical nature of who we are, and now we do. And what do we do with that? David's doctor told me, just hold on, there's something coming.
You can actually use CRISPR to change DNA. You can actually do it.
We could engineer a single gene that could potentially make us all more muscular. But should we make that universally available?
Что человек может создавать человека, который может воевать без страха и без боли. И вот то, о чем я сейчас сказал, может быть страшнее ядерной бомбы. Should we really be manipulating the heredity of future generations given our lack of knowledge about so many things?
I don't know where you draw the line between not having albinism and deciding your kid needs to be an extra foot taller so they can be a good oarsman and go to Yale.
It's time that human finally reach their potential and become our own gods to create the perfect version of ourselves. Eisenhower. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted, influenced, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for this disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. He feared war for profit, and we know how real that became. The same is to be said here. It's the end of humanity. It's not about ethics, religion, or perspective. It always boils down to money. And it's only a matter of time before a human-created elitist class wipes out the rest of humanity. Meanwhile, people want to be their own gods. They want to be solipsistic.
Where is that line? Who's going to draw that?
Anything that will stop my child from suffering, I'm for.
Draw this ethical line wherever you want, but don't draw it in front of my disease.
And let me ask you something. You think it's just they put these edits, these clips in at a specific time for no reason with specific people? Let's look at the edits after they say what they say.
Do with that. David's doctor told me, just hold on. There's something
What was that a picture of? Who on what bed?
coming.
You can actually use CRISPR to change DNA. You can actually do it.
We could engineer a single gene that could potentially make us all more muscular. But should we make that
Make us all more muscular. Show white people in line.
universally available?
Что человек может создавать человека, человек, который может воевать бесстрашно.
So you got a scene showing the egg being fertilized, and you got Putin literally saying, man can create man who can fight without fear or pain.
И без боли. И вот то, о чем
This might be worse than the nuclear bomb, and that's him saying it in 2017.
сказал, может быть страшнее ядерной бомбы. Should we really be manipulating the heredity of future generations?
The heredity of future generations. A little dark-skinned baby.
Given our lack of knowledge about so many things.
I don't know where you draw the line between not having albinism and deciding your kid needs to be an extra.
Not having albinism and deciding whether your kid needs to be an extra foot taller for Yale.
Taller so they can be a good oarsman and go to Yale. Where is that line? Who's going to draw that?
Anything that will stop my child from suffering, I'm for.
Anything that will stop my child from suffering, I'm for. And what do you see?
Draw this ethical line wherever you want, but don't draw it in front of my disease.
What does that mean for this science, where we have the capacity to edit in some things that we think are important? Are we playing God?
Are we playing God?
You don't realize it's disruptive until you look backward. Often you don't realize.
You don't realize it's disruptive because we show nature. And see, everybody seems to forget what happens when you introduce an invasive species to an environment. They forgot what happens when you have your boat dropped in the regional water authority to go fishing and you got mussels on your boat and it invades the water and all the species. Or when we introduce animals into a different environment and they take out a whole different species. You see, it's not the animal's fault. It's the human's fault. So what do you think happens when AI, the artificially created humans, genetically modified, and get brain chips? What do you think happens when they figure out The only thing that makes another living, breathing mammal, reptile, insect, animal, terrestrial on this planet is the humans. What do you think it's going to decide to do when it realizes the world could live without humans, but the humans can't live without the bees and without the animals? What do you think it's going to do?
That you're in the middle of a revolution until after the revolution has occurred.
You don't realize you're in the middle of a revolution until after the revolution has occurred. Kind of like when we created electricity and we didn't have insulation for the wires or fuse boxes. Many homes and people had to die before we evolved and figured out we need to insulate the wires. We need to have special gauge wire. We need to have fuse boxes because we have stupid humans who think they're smart and that they're the top of the food chain and have been removed from the natural world. So they have no idea about any of their evolution. We don't teach it. They know nothing about nature. They know nothing about training elephants or fleas in a jar. They know nothing about science. They know nothing about evolution. They think they know. They think it's all in the scripture. But they also believe predictive programming works, which it does, but they seem to forget how it works. It has to get written before it goes on to the television. Before you tell a vision, you have to write it. You have to put it in a script. And you have to gather a cast. And before you could cast that spell and put it on a channel to channel it out and program the masses, you must write it. And it's in words. In the English language, the England language, the King's language. And you're never taught that. You're never taught the origin of the spelling bees that you're doing. You don't get taught the definition of the very words. The signs, the symbols, where words came from. What do you think the first communication was? Signs and symbols. Then they created words from the signs and symbols. If we look at all the other languages, which the languages that English is derived from, the one world language, it's derived from signs and symbols because they're powerful. Just like memes, same thing. Just like every corporate billionaire has a vision board and learns that when you write down things, they manifest. Like Jim Carrey told you with the check he wrote himself. Like asbestos, the revolution. Sometimes you don't know you're in a revolution until after it's already happened. Let's build everything out of asbestos because it's this great new thing. And then millions of people die. Or nuclear power. See, everybody doesn't understand this because they're not taught it. And in order to predict the weatherman needs to know patterns in history. So, in order to predict the weather, you must know where you've already been. So, in order to know where you're going, you must know where you've already been. And it's real simple. It's elementary. But nobody wants to notice.
The proper way to address it is going to be through political action and the accumulation of political power so you can punish the oppressors and lift up and liberate the oppressed. Right? And look, as a Green Beret, our motto was to free the oppressed. But that's the part where that is an appealing message, in part because we ultimately don't want to come to full grips with the evil that resides in us. When you've spent time in combat, when you've spent time, I think, in law enforcement, and other people just by nature of finding themselves in very dangerous or abusive situations, evil becomes a very, very real thing. It's no longer just some nice philosophical construct with a bunch of people discussing what constitutes evil or how do we measure it. When you've seen truly horrible things, the way I put it once is I don't think you fully recognize evil when you see it. You realize what it is when it looks back.
Yeah.
And
I would agree with that.
Yeah. And so I think we have a lot of people who don't want to contend with that. They want to believe that it's kind of beyond their control. And so they're going to put the responsibility onto the movement to make everything better. And they'll act within the movement, obviously. But when the movement does something, no matter how horrible, in order to achieve these positive end states, well, that's just justifiable. It was necessary. What did Mao say? A revolution is not a dinner party. There's another book called The True Believer, where he talks about the nature of mass movements. And one of the things he really stresses in that is the danger of movements which stress to separate people from everything they've known from, maybe it's from God, maybe it's from their family, maybe it's from their traditions. And having left orphaned, the movement becomes the new family, and the movement becomes the sense of their identity. And without the movement, they don't know who they are. And so whatever the movement needs to do in order to justify its objectives ultimately becomes morally acceptable.
Where do you think, where does this stem from? I ask everybody this when we get into these conversations. Where do you personally think this is stemming from? Is it Russia?
No. I think, I think a lot of the economic, social, and political philosophy which motivates it is rooted in critical theory, which is rooted in Marxism, which is also, again, heavily picked up and influenced by postmodernism, deconstruction, which leads to critical race theory and queer theory and everything else. I think all of that provides an almost comprehensive picture of what's going on, but I think it's more fundamental than that. And this is the part where people get uncomfortable with this as a theological conversation. But let's think about this logically for a minute. If everybody has a worldview, and the starting point of every person's worldview relies on some element of faith, right? The atheist may say, oh, no, I don't put my faith in anything. I trust logic. So you have faith in logic because logic cannot ultimately justify its own existence. You can argue it's a priori if you'd like, but it doesn't. You're going to run into problems. How do you trust your own mind to properly interpret logic? Everybody's worldview starts with that fundamental position. My fundamental position is that there is a God, there is right and wrong, there is objective truth, there is objective morality, and my job is to seek out and understand that. Because insofar as I can live in accordance with that, I can achieve my purpose, I can take care of my family, I can do noble and good things because there's now a measurement for that which is noble and good.
Let me show you something.
All right, last year, I saved these. But they were initially from the latter part of 2020.
And it's wild. It's really wild. The very beginning of it, in a group that I miraculously found, just in this crazy ass way, I can't explain it. I was listening, and then I was talking, and other people were listening and reaching out to me after I spoke, and that was weird for me because I don't usually do these things at that moment ever before in my life. And then I received a message.
TJ, it's very wise of you to believe in something greater than yourself without being blinded by having one definition of it.
You know there's something higher than you, that's what's important. I mean, I know this sounds bad, I don't judge anybody, but in my eyes, you're not an atheist. This is what's important. You're just not making any definitive statements about what it is, you're not preaching to know exactly what it is, and there's nothing wrong with that. You can believe in it without being able to define it. Actually, that's more genuine faith than the people who claim they know exactly what it is.
And then,
that was the most clear, definitive explanation I could have ever thought of. And it was given to me. Because that's true. When you claim to know what God is, definitively, you're lying to yourself. And it's all because of the story that you were taught. that you believe the words that another man wrote down, instead of looking at the definition and understanding the connotation of those words, of the story that another human being experienced. That's what it is. The conscious. The voice in your head that humans every day only use 95% of subconscious throughout their day. They're on autopilot. And the other 5% or 10% or whatever it is conscience. And until you recognize that and flip it and practice that, then you'll just be running the program, never upgrading, never evolving, never understanding, never learning what's important.
Do noble and good things because there's now a measurement for that which is noble and good. If you reject that, or if you want to rebel against it, or you want to replace it with something else, because that's the key. It's this idea that once I get rid of God, it's not that I replace it. Yeah, you do. You have to. By the very definition of how you interpret reality, your worldview has to have a starting point. But apart from that, what is it? Is it your personal preference? Is it what gives you pleasure? Is it what gives you power? I mean, Nietzsche pretty much broke it down that you're going to have the quest for pleasure or the quest for power, perhaps a quest for both. But is that really enough to sustain you or give you genuine purpose or meaning? What if it's untrue? I know a lot of unhappy rich people. Mm-hmm. I know a lot of unhappy powerful people. Mm-hmm. So I do believe it's fundamental. And again, for me, that's really simple. I believe what Christ said. And I believe that's not rooted in wishful thinking. I mean, my gosh, if you were going to try to create a religion or a worldview that was going to make your life easier, you would not pick Christianity.
Yeah, that's true.
But I want to pick what's true. Because ultimately, without truth, and without the believing that there's such a thing as objective truth, how do you even arrive at love? How do you arrive at logic? How do you arrive at science? How do you arrive at justice? What is justice if there's no such thing as objective truth? How do you define it? And what I see is a lot of people that want to ignore the fundamentals and then chase after these things that give them this temporary sense of meaning or purpose or community or whatever else, but ultimately it all rings hollow because they're trying to replace something that is not going to be replaced by a movement or a feeling or a sexual act or whatever else it is. And the only thing I can say is when you find it and you know what it is.
1996. That month.
Yeah. When you find it and you know what it is, the greatest proof, for me, what I found, is going to sound a little esoteric, but I don't know how else to put it. The greatest proof that I personally experienced, aside from digging into the history of scripture or digging into the logic of it or digging into the epistemology of it, there's this verse that says, that talks about the peace which surpasses all understanding. And we're living in a country right now where people are desperate to find some sort of peace like that. Mm-hmm. And what I find fascinating about that verse is it doesn't say you'll have peace. It doesn't say the peace that everyone clearly understands because obviously everything's going good for you and everything's wonderful and everything's rosy. It says the peace which surpasses all understanding, which means the rest of the world is looking in going, how is this possible? It's chaos and it's poverty and it's violence and it's everything else. And for some reason, this guy isn't shaken. Why? Because I already know what I believe. Faith. My identity is in Christ. It's not any of this temporary stuff. Some of the stuff might be good, it might be worthwhile, it might be worth fighting for, but I know where my identity is. And if you know that, well then yeah, bad things are going to happen. You got the mechanism to fight against it. You got the mechanism to create something beautiful out of struggle and challenge. But if you don't even know who you are, what you're doing here, what your purpose is, I mean, that's miserable.
Yeah. Man, that's a great way to put it. What percentage of the population's culture here in the U.S. do you think has changed? Because the reason I'm asking, and I don't know if you've ever thought about it, if you haven't, that's fine, but, you look around, if you look at the media, you look at social media, you look at everything you're being told, what the schools are saying, maybe not all the schools, but we hear there's a big problem in education and academia. looks like this culture shift is everywhere.
Yeah.
Like everywhere. Do you think that there's actually that many people here in the U.S. who have shifted their culture into this new, whatever you want to call it, the woke agenda or whatever? Or do you think this is a facade that's put on by Hollywood, academia, media?
I think that, what was it? I think it was Samuel Adams that was saying that all you need is a really dedicated minority. It's not majorities that actually start revolutions or change things. It's a very, very dedicated and determined minority. I think, I don't think a majority of Americans, like if you sat them down, would sit there and say, yes, I genuinely believe that if you identify as X, Y, and Z, well then reality has changed or adjusted that to make it so. I don't think they really believe that. But what does it matter if they're not willing to say it's wrong?
Yeah.
And there was a guy that wrote a book. He was a doctor. His pen name is Theodore Dalrymple. I think his actual name is Anthony Davies. But he was a British doctor in sub-Saharan Africa, and then he worked in the British Health Service and the prison service as a psychiatrist for many years, and he wrote a book called The Life at the Bottom. And he's not a Christian. I think he's an atheist, or maybe he's a deist, or agnostic, I'm not sure. But he had this quote. He said, he goes, the more I studied communist propaganda, the more I recognized that it wasn't meant to inform, but it was meant to humiliate and intimidate. And therefore, the less it corresponded with reality, the more effective it was. Because when you can first convince someone to be silent in the midst of obvious lies and then get them to repeat those lies, you make them a party to evil. And he concluded it by saying, such a society, or a society composed of emasculated liars, is easy to control. And he said, I've since come to the conclusion that political correctness works the same way and for the same reasons. So, I don't know that a majority believe it. What I'm wondering is, where is our strong minority that's going to stand up and call this for what it is? Because most people are very, very consumed with just trying to live their lives.
Yeah.
And if just living their lives means going along with whatever intellectual absurdity happens to be popular today, they may be willing to accept it thinking it's just a fad, only to wake up too late to find out it wasn't.
Do you think it's a fad?
No.
I don't either. I think I see more and more people starting to speak up about it. I see it in numbers. I see it in ratings. I find my hope hidden in like these small pockets, you know, and I look at media numbers. They're sinking dramatically. You know, it's been a huge downslope since 2020, and it's.
And what you need to recognize is, how do they keep that media alive? Well, they keep it alive by your attention. So what's going on with Russell Brand right now is them grabbing your attention to keep those numbers up and to keep you distracted. But you don't see it. You see it as the Matrix. You see it as an attack. Yeah, because you don't see the actual attack. You don't see what they're actually doing. And you stay in the game. The Roman circus.
Spiraling out of control. I feel like now that they're just grabbing onto anything they can possibly get to try to get them numbers. And, you know, and then I look at things like, we're both podcasters. We look at the top podcasts, all the top podcasts. Not all of them. A lot of them are talking about things like this. When that gives me hope, you know, to see like the things that you can't. I mean, I guess they could fudge them, but they're not being fudged 100% yet. And you're seeing, you know, you see the Bud Light thing, you see the Target thing, you know, and that gives me hope. I think but I agree with you. You know, what's the old saying? Evil prevails when good men do nothing. Yep. And even just people always want to know. I mean, I'm sure you get it on your podcast too. You know, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do?
To your point, just because I don't think it's a fad, and just because I do think it has gained far more prominence than we realize, doesn't mean I'm not hopeful. And the reason why I am hopeful is because I actually don't think it's going to take as much as a lot of people think it will to beat it back. My concern is where they're going to look to do that. And I think a lot of people will look at it, a lot of people that, let's say, more on the conservative or even more of like the libertarian side, less the libertarians, more the conservatives, are like, well, if we just elect the right people.
Yeah.
Look, I'm an elected official. I'm not telling anybody politics isn't important. But, as we talked about at one point, if you were waiting around for a politician to preserve your liberties or to protect your family or to protect you, you're a failure. And I don't know how else to put it. Yeah, my job, and here's the part too, because men are especially under attack right now. Those men that believe in traditional standards of what they're supposed to do as men, as husbands, as fathers, as protectors, as providers, they're all being told that these are toxic attributes. And it's like, no, when you look at things like aggression, when you look at things like a capacity and a capability for violence, those are not toxic in and of themselves. They're morally neutral. And I will tell you this, if the good guys don't know how to use those things, they're going to be ruled by the bad guys. And so that instinct that young men have, and they're looking for leadership, and they're not seeing it, they're the ones that are when they see the stuff that you talk about, when they see some of these other podcasts, and all of a sudden it's like they have a sanctuary of people that are telling them that, no, those instincts that you have are good, but they have to be developed and they have to be fostered in such a way as to serve the noble and the just and the true, as opposed to giving into the other use cases for them. And that's the part where when people start recognizing that a lot of the best way to fight against this is not just to be active politically, it's not just to go out and protest and things like that. If you want to point out a lie, the very next thing you better do is point to the truth. And the truth is never going to be adequately defended simply by good argumentation. It's going to be adequately defended by you living it out in your life and people seeing the fruit of that. Like, we did these things. We told culture to go pound sand, to piss off. And we adopted these things that we knew that were going to be true with the way that we ran our marriage, with the way that we raised our kids, with the way that we raised our business, with the way that we conducted ourselves with our friends, with our family, with our community. And the success speaks for itself, because this other path will lead to chaos. It is only a matter of time. Yeah. It is not an if, it is a when, it is a how bad. And when people when people finally wake up to the point that we were lied to about this, one of two things is going to happen. They're either going to jump onto the next lie, which happens to be convenient and grab their attention, or they're actually going to be convinced of the truth because there was enough people willing to fight for it and actually display it.
I love hearing that. Let's talk about some things people can do. Back to that quote, evil prevails when good men do nothing. There are so many, I think Americans, they've been spoon-fed everything, and when I say good men do nothing, I'm not saying you need to get out and protest, get out and start a revolution, any of that shit. I'm saying just do something, get loud about it. Let's talk about, I want to talk about this anyway, so let's just do it now, school shootings. Yeah. What I see, and this has been going on for forever. I tried to get involved with after Parkland happened several years ago, and all I see over and over and over again, are parents that want to pass the buck. It's the Second Amendment's fault. It's the school's fault. It's the police officer's fault. It's the security guy's fault. And it's always everybody else's fault. Mm-hmm. My question is, what did you do as a parent to teach your kid what to do when this happens? It's happening. Mm-hmm. Politicians aren't doing anything about it. This has been going on for, I wish I knew how many years, at least 20 years, and it just happened here in Nashville, Tennessee, at Covenant. And every time this happens, you see these parents and it's, well, why aren't they going to hire this? Why aren't they going to hire that? And here in Franklin, there's a school, a private Christian school, and everybody goes on about this, right? Nobody wants to do anything. The parents all got together and they said, hey, we want to pay you more. We want to pay you more to get a field security officer in here, a real one. And which I think that's great. Why wouldn't you do that? Why wasn't it done 20 years ago? Well, the administration at the school basically told the parents, absolutely not, we're not doing that. Mm-hmm. I don't know anybody that took their kids out of the school and put them into a place that does have one. Yeah. That's what you do. That's how you fix this shit. Mm-hmm. You remove your kid from the business that you're supporting, the school, mm-hmm. and put them into a school that's doing the right thing. Yeah. And then when they have no more students, they'll realize they're going to go broke and starve, and maybe they'll start doing the right thing, or they'll stay on their high horse and starve. But it's little things like that. You don't agree with what Target's doing? I know it's convenient. I know you live 5 blocks away from there. Spend the extra 15 minutes and go to Walmart or go to whatever store that's not pushing that agenda, but they don't do it.
And they also don't do it with the fucking very platforms that were fucking designed to capture everybody. That's what I don't understand. Why do you keep feeding the very platforms that have created this by design?
Well, if you,
it's that simple though. Yeah. That's doing something.
Yes. No, I agree. I think that I will see people come on and they'll ask the same questions, and we've done a lot of episodes on our podcast talking about what can you do. And one of the biggest things that we push to everybody is stop with this idea that what you can do is, again, vote for president, or what you can do is, change things which are so far beyond your control that you're going to get easily frustrated and quit. So what are practical things you can do? And oh, by the way, how do you develop discipline? How do you develop good habits? And then don't look for the suckiest thing you could possibly do first. To the grocery store, and I saw bare shelves for the first time in my adult life in America. And that really hit me home, where it's like, this is bad. And it's not like I thought it was going to last forever, but I didn't like the feeling. Well, there's two approaches you can take from that feeling. You can take the approach of, somebody needs to do something about this. Mm-hmm. Or you can take the approach, I need to do something about this. All right, so what can I do? Well, I can't open up a grocery store. That's not okay, can I grow a garden? Is there any sort of animals that I can raise? I started to get really, really interested in the homesteading movement. Right around COVID. And we'd always had a garden before. We'd had chickens before and stuff like that. But I started looking at that from the perspective of, how much can I grow? How much, can I really take care of, let's say, the significant amount of the needs for my family and potentially my friends and whatnot, if we just learn more about gardening, raising some really simple livestock, preserving food. And here's what I found. It was therapeutic as hell. I'm now the main guy that loves to garden in the house. I got my tomato plants and my zucchini and my cucumbers and everything else. We've raised pigs before, haven't had the best luck, but we've raised pigs before, meat chickens, regular chickens. We know how to raise goats now. What we found is that it was a positive thing for which we already had some level of interest in, and it provided a level of resilience. And then it provided a level of opportunity to learn something new that was kind of fun. And then it provided a new community of people that thought the same way about this particular problem. And oh, by the way, we're more than happy to help and encourage you in it. And then, by the way, it provided an opportunity to be able to spend time with your kids working on something or trying something out that was fun. Like part of my son's homeschool project this year is he loves sriracha. All right, dude, well, I just grew a bunch of red jalapenos. They're turning red. We're going to sit there. We're going to learn how to make this. So find things that you already have. Like if something really concerns you to the point where, hey, this keeps you up, and you have some sort of talent or skill or just interest in how you could potentially alleviate that, start there. Learn something new. Learn a skill. Get a part of a community. I cannot tell you how much encouragement and joy I have found and I would not consider myself like a full-on homesteader or anything like that.
And that's why when you go look at history in Daniel Shays' rebellion, there was a reason they were going after the courts. All the farmers. Go look at Daniel Shays' rebellion and learn about the history. And also, stop posting shit to tell the world that you're this or you're that. Or happy birthday to this one and happy birthday to that one. Tell them to their fucking face. Stop being digital. They have removed you from the natural world. Start speaking up about the real shit.
Okay, I'll admit it. I was a coward. There were things I should have spoken about, but kept quiet. I'll admit that I was scared that I could get cancelled or deplatformed for speaking out on some emergency issues that are going on in the world. And in this video, I am a coward no longer. There are 7 major scams in the world. There are 7 huge things that are going on, that are happening to you, that they should not happen in this world. They are ruining humanity. And not enough people dare speak up about it for fear of being cancelled, and I'm going to share them with you right now. I ask for 7 minutes of your time. I ask you to stand up and speak out, at the very least to share this video. This is all I ask of you. I'm going to cover the 7 great scams of the world: debt, taxes, health, wokeism, crime, war, and mental health. And then I've got a special one at the end as well. I'm going to try and cover them all in 1 minute each. If you have any thoughts, or you believe there are any great scams in the world, or you've been holding back from speaking out about, please share in the comments. Okay, debt. Our fiat currency money system is one of the greatest scams in the world because it is a glorified Ponzi scheme where money is created out of nothing. It is made up by the central banks and the governments, and then it is loaned to you, and you are used as a consumable. So the banks can create money out of nothing without earning it or working for it. They lend it to you, they get you addicted to it, and then they control you for the rest of your life.
Exactly. And everybody who's saving up their gold and their silver, I would like you to ponder something very simple. Go watch every apocalyptic TV show, Walking Dead, or movie that has ever been created in all of history. And you're going to notice something. Nobody is trading in gold or silver or any currency. They trade in knowledge, abilities, and skills, which is what's been removed from you, from the natural world. When you get captured, domesticated, bred in captivity, like the elephant in the zoo. When they break your will after you've been captured, and now you're breeding in captivity, and the only way for you to survive is with the currency. The only way for the elephant to survive is by man feeding him. That's why when they're done using him for their money, for the zoo or the circus, they cannot release him back into the natural world. He will die. So they put him in sanctuaries. And that's why you have sanctuary cities. Because man, if the power were to go out, 90% of Americans would perish in 9 months. Go look up griddownpowerup.com. Go look up Sean Ryan's interview with the man from Grid Down Power Up. Go look at the facts. Because just like when you take the elephant from the wild, breed him in captivity, you remove all of his evolution, all of his natural born instincts. The same thing happens to every other living, breathing entity on this fucking planet. Remove them from their environment. Anything they have ever learned for thousands of years is gone. Hence why we're still finding new tribes in the Amazon who obviously survived the Black Plague and every other catastrophic made-up fucking thing for profit. And some of these tribes don't even allow people to come on their island. But you know what's so interesting? They're still procreating. They don't have modern anything. And they don't have hospitals or medicine. So ask yourself, how is that possible? If you live in such a dangerous, diseased world. Ask yourself why they're more healthy. Why they're more fit. Ask yourself why the pygmies live far longer. Ask yourself why all of Italy is elderly people who are laughing and smiling. And you ever notice that all the tribes always got a smile on their face because they didn't forget the small things in life. You remember this guy from the History Channel, living off the land? Eustace Conway, the last American man. Do you remember him?
My heroes, Malcolm X, is also the hero of a man that I recently became acquainted with, who is now one of my new heroes, a fellow named Dr. Shiva, and he stands for truth, freedom, and health.
So, Why are we looking for heroes and not being our own hero? Well, what is Dr. Shiva saying?
And who came in health?
Danny, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing good.
Good. I'm so happy to have you on. I've been following you for a while, and while we have this time together today, I want to touch in on a couple things. Of course, your run for the presidency, but I also want to talk about the health freedom movement and how weird it's gotten. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, did it start off as a sham and then the shills kind of emerged, or was it co-opted somewhere along the way in the past few years?
No, it always started off as a sham. The health freedom movement doesn't have the right operating system, meaning, look, Danny, here's a bottom line. If you look at the health freedom movement, particularly one of the biggest misleaders of it, Booby effing Kennedy of that movement, right? And then all the other people who surround him. I mean, it's no different than when you go to Expo West, right? When you go to Expo West, by the way, to everyone listening, Expo West is the biggest sort of natural products conference that takes place once a year in Anaheim, California, typically. And it's all the natural products companies show up. And you have basically, I would say in fact, it's gotten worse. 95% of those people don't really care about people's health. It's about taking some health product, branding and marketing it and shoving it down people's throats. Most of them don't even take a systems approach to the body or science. Has become essentially infiltrated. It's as bad as Big Pharma in my view. Big Vitamin has become bad as Big Pharma. But so when you look at that, these people are driven by making money, Danny, period. And none of them ever had to work bottoms up. None of them ever really had studied the body as a system. It's about, they see an opportunity. How can they leverage a crisis in an opportunity and make money off of it? And that's what's going on right now in every field. And I know all of these people because I was in the trenches fighting for it and still am. Donald Trump leveraged the election integrity movement to make about $500 million for himself and his family. Booby fucking Kennedy takes advantage of the anti-vax mothers, okay? Not to really solve the medical freedom issue, but because his family, his uncle Ted Kennedy, his other uncle John Kennedy were the ones, and including himself, are the ones who created the entire infrastructure so the government could have a say in what is jabbed into your body. Right? It is his uncle John F. Kennedy, 1962, who created the National Vaccination Act. Right? People started getting injured. His other brother, John F. Kennedy's brother, Ted Kennedy, Booby's uncle, is the one who killed a woman here in Massachusetts, is the one then who created the National Vaccine Injury Program with others in Congress, which essentially indemnified all the pharma companies. Brought to you again by the Kennedys, created more government. So John Kennedy's the one who created all the corruption in government with the National Vaccination Act. Ted Kennedy created the vaccine courts, right? So you can't even sue Big Pharma in federal court. And then Booby fucking Kennedy is the worst slime bag of it all. Because what does he actually say, Danny? He says, I believe in I want full vaccination of all Americans. I'm the one who had to unearth that video because all these white liberals, women typically, followed him thinking he's going to save them. He wants full vaccination of all Americans. And then he goes and rails on saying how everything is corrupt and how he's going to use these corrupt institutions to create safe vaccines. Well, how's he going to do that? That means he's going to have to create more government. You see, end to end, these people are liars. They are all for centralization of power. And then you go to Elon Musk, another bullshitter, okay? Where government ends and Elon Musk begins, nobody knows. He's the one who got funded nearly $7 billion from government for SpaceX, another $1.5 billion for carbon credits for Tesla. And Section 230 immunity is what gives companies like Twitter and others indemnification so they can get a $50 billion valuation. All of this at the behest of government. These people are government frontmen. And right now, what you're seeing is quite extraordinary. Over the weekend, you saw this other scumbag, Russell Brand. Suddenly, he's becoming a martyr. I mean, which came first, right? Did Russell Brand become anti-establishment? And then the stories came about him, alleging to have raped women, right? And now he can use that to say, I didn't do any of this. They're attacking me because I'm anti-establishment. Or did he actually do this
And then he later on became you see, these people are now creating themselves to be fake martyrs in order to sucker attention back to themselves. And none of these people have any solutions, Danny. Nothing. Their solution is to vote for me. And after you vote for me, then I will do something. Very, very different than what I do, Danny. As you know, I've been building solutions all my life. I created the first email system. We created Cytosolve. We created Systems Health. We've helped millions and millions of people's lives all over the world. And my running for president is essentially to bring those solutions to people much faster. So, for example, we can go down, we can talk about, now that I've bashed these morons, which is what they are, and they're all satanic people, they're worse than the obvious establishment, because it's like Malcolm X said, when a wolf comes at you, you know it's coming to eat you. The fox goes like this. And that's what these people are. And it's very interesting. Most of them are white males. Tucker Carlson, Elon Musk, Joe Rogan, Russell fucking Brand, Donald Trump, Booby fucking Jr., Andrew Tate. What I find interesting is none of these people, they actually work very hard to conceal our work. Women, on the other hand, I've noticed fascinating, will do podcasts with us, right? These guys are not men. All of them are really not men. They're not warriors. They're fake men. They attempt to essentially consolidate power. Many of these people hate women. They hate America. They hate freedom. And you have to really think about it.
I think he's got Joe Rogan wrong, because Joe Rogan is clearly doing something. And Joe Rogan basically is the vehicle for information. So if this man was smart, he would go on Joe Rogan. But why would Joe invite you on if that's how you're going to treat all the things he's already done? Look at the comedy club he's creating. He's taken the very model of Hollywood and brought it back to the people. The very podcast you're creating right now, Dr. Shiva, is only because of Joe Rogan. He took what he learned in movies and in TV and Hollywood, and he brought it to the people. He's also one of the only ones that removed his content from YouTube and brought it to another platform. And if you look at the content that's on YouTube, there's only a few videos that are in full form. And they're the most specific videos, the most important ones. Like the interview with Tristan Harris about the social dilemma and Google. And the interview with Dr. Robert Epstein talking about Google. All the rest of them are on Spotify. Driving the traffic away from Google. So I disagree with that. But the rest of the shit he's saying is true.
Tucker Carlson's, and you look at all of them, many of them have one degree of connection to the government or to the intelligence agencies. Go look at Tucker Carlson's father. He's the one who created Tucker Carlson, AKA, is the one who created the entire government, media network to spread disinformation. His father did that for the CIA. He wanted to be part of the CIA, right? And it's not like he didn't. They did make him part of the CIA. He spreads disinformation all day. The disinformation, but he's gotten a little more sophisticated where he watches which way the wind blows and then jumps on that typically 1 to 2 years later and then puts on his face and tries to expose people, quote unquote, exposing people. So our movement is the only movement on the planet which actually cares for people, which actually is fighting for people bottoms up. And the reason is I'm bottoms up. I came from the lowest caste in India. So think about this, a guy who's the lowest caste in India is now running for president of the United States. None of these people, you can say that about them. This guy, Vivek the Snake, is a Brahmin from the upper caste who grew up oppressing people, who grew up benefiting from things he never even earned. He got a scholarship, a Soros scholarship, to go to law school while he had just made the previous year about $1 million of scholarship, which was an affirmative action scholarship. And then he says he doesn't stand for affirmative action. You see, these people are not one of us. So we can talk about.
Hold up. When you say one of us, you're out of MIT, which we know is pretty much part of it, and you're also a Fulbright scholar. So how do we know that you're not another one?
Well, where do you live?
I live in New Mexico.
Yeah, but what country do you live in?
The United States.
Yeah, what is the United States? It's the biggest imperialist global power on the planet, right? So let's apply that to you. So you're part of the global power. You've lived here longer than I have. You were born here.
Right, but I wasn't allowed into the clubs. And
right, but you belong to the biggest club, the United States. The issue is, what did you do here, right? When I went to MIT, what did I do? I didn't even know about MIT until 2 weeks before I applied. When I went to MIT, the day I got there, I started fighting the administration. I started exposing them. I built the biggest union on campus. I organized workers to smash them. That's what I did. And I'm doing that now for the United States people. Big difference. Big difference than all the other people who attended MIT. So we live in these worlds. The issue is, what do you do when you live in that world? And any world I've gone to, I've always led the fight against the establishment. That's a big difference, Danny.
I honor that. I totally honor that.
Yeah, so the issue is, what do they do? Did Donald Trump walk away from all this? No, he uses this now to even make more money. You see what I'm saying? They are doing something so insidious. They're using the suffering of people to act as though they're going to fight that. When you look at their history, they've never been on the ground fighting for any of these people.
So knowing what you know about how this system works and how corrupt it is, like, do you think that you really have a shot at winning the presidency? Do you really want to be the president? Like, with your background being in tech and engineering, like, is this a job that sounds fun to you?
Well, let's talk about a couple of things there. My background being in engineering. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the question, do I think I can win? So let's dissect these questions, because the questions people ask are based on certain views of the world, okay? First of all, my background is a lower caste Indian who's had to fight all my life. If anything, my most compelling credentials are being a warrior and fighting since I was 4 years old, okay? And throughout my life, it just so happened that I ended up getting engineering degrees. But throughout that entire cycle, fighting personally and collectively, I've experienced the actual struggle that everyday people do, and beyond that, and I fought. So that's.
But do you have enough faith in the fiction of a constitutional republic to believe that they would allow a wild card like you?
Well, it's not. We don't care about what they're going to give to us, Danny. We have to take it. Okay. No one gives you anything. You take it. So here's the deal. We have to look at the long arc of human history. The long arc of human history is a finite set of people trying to enslave other people. That's been the long arc. And then those finite set of people, the slaves, attempting to create a better world for them, more truth, more freedom, more health, truth, freedom, health. That's been the long arc of human history. No different than the arc of human history where people looked up into the night sky and they saw the sun, and then they saw darkness, saying, wow, could I have light, right? So then it took this long process for Maxwell's equations to be created. Now we have electricity, now we have motors, we're doing this. None of this would be possible without Maxwell's equations. And a lot of people don't, and every student should know Maxwell's equations. More people know what Kim Kardashian wears than Maxwell's equations. That's really unfortunate.
Right.
Most people don't even know what Bernoulli's principle is. Bernoulli's principle is why we fly airplanes. Now, suppose I were to tell you that there are fundamental scientific principles to destroying the establishment of people and to liberating more people. What would you say that? And what would you say that I've discovered those principles no different than Bernoulli, no different than Maxwell? What would you say that I have figured out there are fundamental principles, and without those principles, it's just a pipe dream, and people will be saying, well, do you think we can fly, Dr. Shiva? Do you think we can one day overcome the establishment knowing how, right? Because we'll keep asking that generation after generation. And those are good questions to ask. But once you have the knowledge of these principles, it's over. And that's what I've discovered. And that's why
those principles stand up to this stronghold that the nefarious puppeteers have on the mass media.
Well, look, Let me put it to you in simple engineering terms, right? The way the world, or larger terms, Danny, the way the world changes, in my view, is three elements are needed. Anything changes. And you do anything in your life. You need a vision, and you meditate on that. You have a clear vision of where you want to go. But that's not enough. You need to have a framework of how you're going to achieve that vision. These are called scientific principles, a framework, okay? And then you need to do the work, engineering. So you need the vision, you need the science, and you need the engineering, okay? If we wanted to fly, we have to have a vision. Wow, one day I'm going to create a machine. We have to understand Bernoulli's principle, and then we have to create the flying machines. Now, if we're going to liberate the 8 billion people on this planet from the 0.001% who think that it's their God-given right to rule over other people, how are you going to do that? You have to have a vision. Well, the vision is truth, freedom, health. And what you come through that vision is that if you look at that little curve there, okay, it's a little red line, you find out that the life expectancy of the United States is going like this, downward. Right. And it's not only recently, it's not the vaccine, okay? It's been going like this for the last 60 years. This is because both wings of the establishment have been destroying people's health. I'm the only candidate talking about this. Why? Because I actually care about people, because I come from those people. So number two, in order to overcome that, how do we do that? Well, you understand that that's a systems problem. We need a systems overhaul. Well, what's the system? So the vision is clear, truth, freedom, health. How do we get there? We need to educate as many people as possible about system science. Just like when we wanted to build an airplane, we had to educate as many engineers as possible about Bernoulli's principle. Now you have that education. Now you apply it. Well, what's that application? Well, the application is getting on the ground, building one-on-one relationships. When I was at MIT, what I learned was the concept of a flyer. This flyer is more powerful than anything on social media you can do. You're meeting with people, you're handing it out, you're having conversations. Offline, the future is offline. And that's the engineering of it. You say, so my running for president, what is that all about? Well, every 2 to 4 years, they get people hyped up to vote for one moron or the other moron on one wing of the establishment. Who's going to oppress you? Well, I'm not one of those morons. I come from people bottoms up. And on this presidential election, we're presenting a completely different paradigm shift. And the paradigm shift is long before I become president, we're actually going to solve problems. I want to go over that. What is my solution for healthcare, right? And these solutions can be implemented now. Now, if I become president, what will I do differently? I'll do exactly what I'm doing right now, but to 8 billion people, using the presidency as a megaphone.
But how do your flyers, your systems overhaul, your science, and your clear vision stand up to Dominion voting machines? Like,
well, let's talk about.
How are you going to get past that?
Well, look, I'm the one who brought out the stuff on the Dominion voting machines. Then Mike Lindell made it some wackadoodle stuff and sold pillows. Okay, here's the bottom line: nothing has ever been accomplished through voting. Let's be simple here. We're about building a movement. We're building a movement. Now, if a guy like me is ever going to even win, you're going to have a movement. How did women get the right to vote?
First wave feminism, the suffragette movement. I don't know.
Exactly. It was bottoms up.
Indoctrinated in this country, so I don't really believe what I've been taught.
Women went to this. So Susan B. Anthony here, she went to the Democrat Congress, and she said, I would like, we should have. She wanted universal suffrage, by the way, for all people, because black people can vote, okay? She was fighting for not just women. They laughed at her. So she took to the streets, and they organized a referendum, and that's how the 19th Amendment came to be. Politicians are all...
And, if I may, I'm guessing that at that time, the people weren't under the extreme mind control that more than half of our populace is under. So how are you meandering around that?
Offline. The future is offline. Look, as a technologist, I can tell you that as of November 16, 2018, which is when the Cybersecurity Information Security Act was signed by Donald fucking Trump, unanimously voted by every member of the House, unanimous consent by Senate, the First Amendment is gone. There is no First Amendment on digital media. The only thing we have remaining, and you go try to pass out these flyers, people try to stop you, and you have to defend your First Amendment. So if you look at this flyer, and if you really, can I share something on your screen?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So let me share. So this flyer is a weapon, okay? And it's a weapon that anyone can use. So where do you get this weapon? So let me just share with you a little bit. So I want everyone to go to shivaforpresident.com. Let me share that with you. And if people go to this site,
Dr. Shiva, so that you can share.
okay, yeah. So yep. Tell me when you're ready.
Ready.
Right. So if everyone goes to shivaforpresident.com, let me make this a little bit smaller. You will see on the right side there's something called free downloads. You click on that, and when you go down, it's got a great flyer. It took us a lot. This flyer is potent. First of all, it's one page. You don't have to print it on color. Go to your library, use their printers, print out black and white. And what does this flyer say? Well, first of all, it says Dr. Shiva, President. Well, we're using the occasion of the presidential election, truth, freedom, health. And it says shatter the swarm. But the messaging here is very simple. The lesser of two evils is killing your children. What are we being dramatic by saying that? No, because as the flyer says, so the left side of the flyer, Danny, is the problem, right? Since the 1980s, it lets across people the policies of the swarm. But where we are at is Democrat and Republican, all the way from the Kennedys to the Reagans to the Trumps to the Bidens to the Bushes. They have all been part of this. Every celebrity, every academic, everyone of note should be held responsible for this curve. So your child's life expectancy now is lower than yours. It's a disgrace. It's a disgrace. And the only way out of this is a systems overhaul. If someone's thinking, well, you know, Trump said some good things. Booby said some really good things. I think I'm going to vote for him. Russell Brand, ooh, he's being attacked. All of these people have profited from the establishment. And the only way out is a systems overhaul. Well, how do you get a systems overhaul? Well, you have to build a bottoms-up movement. So first of all, people need to understand the enemy. The swarm video, it took me 59 years to do that video. You know, it's a whiteboard drawing. If you haven't seen it, Danny, you should see it. But it really, 15 minutes. And then, so the left side is a problem. Well, the right side is a solution. Well, number one, we have to shatter the swarm. That's our goal. We are a movement, and our movement is the only one on the planet can save your child, because number one, we're telling people that we have to organize independently, and we have to become our heroes. And we begin with telling people, look, you have to understand the system dynamics of control. And there's a science to it. I used to teach that science at MIT. And there's a science to it. I used to teach that science at MIT. Now we've made that accessible to everyone. And then finally, we tell people to get to our open house. And what do we teach at our open house? We don't just screw around and say, I'm going to do this or that. Give me money. We talk, you know, it's a 6-cycle rotating open house. So last week we did the environment. And you know what we did on the environment? We actually taught people skills about how to shop locally, how to support their local farmers. And then we do science. At the last one, we talked about how sound pollution destroys your brain, leads to all sorts of metabolic disease. And most of the people who experience high sound are the people who live in low-income areas. The week before that, we did healthcare. And we're on our third rotation now, 18 weeks now. We taught people what is the immune system. How do you beef up your immune system? Here and now. What are the vitamins you can take? What are the supplements? What are the things you can do? And that's what I did in 2020. While Booby fucking Kennedy was promoting lockdowns, that's what we were doing. So do I need to be elected president to do that? No. But can I reach a lot more people? Yes. And that solution, Danny, is without the government. You don't need the government.
Right. And so when you're president, are you going...
And I'll end it with this. The definition of zombie, if you look it up in a Brave browser search, is going to say, in voodoo belief and popular folklore, a corpse that has been reanimated, especially by means of supernatural power or spell. One who looks or behaves like an automaton, like a fucking robot. A computer connected to the internet and controlled by a remote unauthorized user to perform malicious tasks without the owner being aware. Which is what socialism media was created for. The NPC, the zombie, who gets taught Walking Dead through predictive programming, and they think that zombies are dead people. when zombies are actually the living people. Then we type in the same exact phrase, zombie definition, into Google. And what are you shown? A corpse said to be revived by witchcraft, especially in certain African and Caribbean religions. A tall mixed drink consisting of several kinds of rum, liqueur, and fruit juice. And then they show you the picture. Let's go back here and let's look up independent. Not governed by a foreign power. Self-governing. Free from influence, guidance, or control of another or others. Self-reliant. Not determined or influenced by someone or something else. Not contingent. So the very word that the Declaration of Independence describes, by definition, is not governed. Let's look up the definition of govern. To make and administer the public policy and affairs of a state, for an example, exercise sovereign authority over, to control the speed or magnitude of or regulate, to control the actions or behavior of. That's what govern means. Meant an obsolete of mean. An obsolete of mean. A common suffix of Latin origin forming from verbs, nouns, which usually denotes the results of an act or the act itself, as in alignment, fragment, segment, commandment, document, monument, government. Now, sovereign. One that exercises supreme permanent authority, especially in a nation or other government unit. A king, a queen, or other noble person who serves as a chief of state, a ruler or monarch, a national governing council or committee. Citizen. A person owing loyalty to and entitled by birth or naturalization to the protection of a state or nation. A resident of a city or town, especially one entitled to vote and enjoy other privileges. A civilian. Why is this important? Well, it's important because if you understand the language, a vassal, a person who held land from a feudal lord and received protection in return for homage and allegiance, a bondman, a slave, a subordinate, or dependent. If you understand these things, and you look at the documents that you have given consent to, and you actually read them, like your birth certificate, your social security card, and all government documents, taxes, and they all have capital letters. Because what is capital? What is capital? Dependent, determined, influenced, or controlled by something else. A subordinate to another clause, phrase, or word. Relying on or requiring the aid or support of another. So your Second Amendment, a militia, was not supposed to be a federal governing body. Your politicians are the sovereigns that you give your power to. And you are the citizen, the subordinate. That's why back in the day, when there was more guns than people, you didn't have school shootings. And the sheriff, if somebody had a duel outside the bar, and they had a squirrel, a problem, some kind of conflict, they dealt with it. And the sheriff didn't do anything. Because they were independent. And they were sovereign. And he didn't have school shootings because people were educated. They were intelligent. They weren't removed from their natural environment because they were actually independent. They weren't captured. They weren't zombies. They didn't lose their evolution. They weren't like the Nazi Prussian model education system that captured them, the most modern technological society of the time, to create the Holocaust. The obedient order followers. The solipsistic behavior. The good cop, bad cop, basic psychology. It was all right there for you to see, and you choose not to. It's right in front of your face every day, and you refuse to predict the weather. And all of those and us that have been predicting the weather for decades and years now, telling you things before they happen, you still refuse to stand up and do anything. Why is that? Why is it that I have a post from 2020, November 2020, that has no shares, no likes, no nothing, that's tagged,
understand and recognize now, because
everybody. It's got everybody tagged, November 1st, 2020.
So
2 likes, 6 shares, 256 views. Literally telling you everything that was coming. Well, because we have already given our consent. Well, because algorithms are programmed by humans who choose on their platform what can and cannot be seen. Thus, the only things to get your attention and take your money and keep you distracted are going to be the only things seen. Unless you learn the algorithm. Unless you play on the platform. And continue to feed them. To continue to make them more powerful. Hence why there's certain groups and certain individuals that remain on there. But they'll boycott Bud Light. They'll boycott all these things. They'll boycott the vaccine, but they won't boycott the very platforms that they know, that they have already been shown hundreds of times over that have been designed to capture them. They'll remain on them because you see that root of all evil, that make-believe, shiny object that you can only survive on now is bonded to you. You are now bonded. You're in bondage. That's why the blindfold is over the eyes, holding the scale of liberty.
This is for all you voters out there who seem to have forgotten.
Separate the right from the left, step 5. Separate the white from the black, step 6. Separate the rich from the poor. Use religion and equality to separate them more, step 7. Fabricate a problem, made a lie, step 8. Put it on the news every night, step 9. When people start to fight and divide, take control. This is called situational design. Step 1. Train the people only to consume, step 2. Infiltrate adults with the news, step 3. Indoctrinate the children through the schools and the music and the apps on the phones that they use, step 4. Separate the right from the left, step 5. Separate the white from the black, step 6. Separate the rich from the poor. Use religion and equality to separate them more, step 7. Fabricate a problem, made a lie, step 8. Put it on the news every night, step 9. When people start to fight and divide, take control. This is called situational design.
I don't know how else to do this, but I'm trying to do this with the systems and the powers that be that I understand and recognize now because of the social dilemma and all the things that I've been trying to say to
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Train by day, Joe Rogan podcast by night, all day.
Tristan, how are you?
Good to be here.
Good to have you here, man. You were just telling me before we went on air the numbers of the social dilemma, and they're bonkers. So what? Just say that.
Yeah, the social dilemma was seen by 38 million households in the first 28 days on Netflix, which I think is broken records. And if you assume
go viral across the world, like watching the social dilemma and the fucking, excuse my French, and the point of watching it for the enlightened education that you get from watching it, which is now gone viral.
Tristan Harris, the battle for our
biology.
attention. The battle for our attention. Technology, mindfulness, and the future of humanity. 5 months ago.
Thank you, Senator Thune and Senator Schatz. Everything you said, it's sad to me because it's happening not by accident, but by design. Because the business model is to keep people engaged, which in other words, this hearing is about persuasive technology. And persuasion is about an invisible asymmetry of power. When I was a kid, I was a magician. And magic teaches you that...
Magic. What was the definition of zombie? In voodoo belief and popular folklore, a corpse that has been reanimated, especially by means of supernatural power or spell.
You can have asymmetric power without the other person realizing it. You can masquerade to have asymmetric power while looking like you have an equal relationship. You say, pick a card, any card, while meanwhile you know exactly how to get that person to pick the card that you want. And essentially what we're experiencing with technology is an increasing asymmetry of power that's been masquerading itself as a equal or contractual relationship where the
a computer connected to the internet and controlled by remote unauthorized user to perform malicious tasks without the owner being aware.
responsibility is on us. So let's walk through why that's happening. In the race for attention, because there's only so much attention, companies have to get more of it by being more and more aggressive. I call it the race to the bottom of the brainstem. So it starts with techniques like pull to refresh. So you pull to refresh your newsfeed. That operates like a slot machine. It has the same kind of addictive qualities that keep people in Las Vegas hooked to the slot machine.
So Las Vegas, the casino, is using psychology to keep people hooked. It's psychology.
Other examples are removing stopping cues. So if I take the bottom out of this glass and I keep refilling the water or the wine, you won't know when to stop.
A bar keeps you buying and using your money by your glass continuously getting empty and needing to be refilled by using psychology. Instead of you buying the six-pack and having your own bar at your own house, independent, where you won't be wasting your money to make somebody else more powerful over you. It's all psychology. The grocery store. Why certain items are a certain color with certain labels, with certain fonts, at what height of the aisle, is all psychology. Why McDonald's, KFC, Pizza Hut are all painted in red. It's all psychology that you're not taught.
Drinking. So that's what happens with infinitely scrolling feeds. We naturally remove the stopping cues, and this is what keeps people scrolling. But the race for attention has to get more and more aggressive. And so it's not enough just to get your behavior and predict what will take your behavior. We have to predict how to keep you hooked in a different way. And so it crawled deeper down the brainstem into our social validation. So that was the introduction of likes and followers. How many followers do I have? And that got it was much cheaper to, instead of getting your attention, to get you addicted to getting attention from other people.
That's why Twitter, you now have your engagement. That's why Telegram, that uses voice, that everybody has a mute button. So say somebody comes into the group conversation that is emotional and they're not listening. Well, instead of censoring them or booting them or moderating them and kicking them out so they never learn, you can mute them. And after they run out of energy, just like training elephants or training any other animal, they'll listen. They'll be calmed down because they're out of energy. And then they'll be able to hear. And then they'll be able to recognize that they were just emotional. That's why Telegram, we're talking about things that now Twitter Spaces has been created after that. And all the things we were talking about on Telegram are being re-talked about now on Twitter Spaces. But what everybody doesn't recognize is when you're in a Twitter Spaces conversation, you're now going through your cell phone as a phone call. Not through the internet when you're on your cell phone. You're going as a phone call. And you could recognize this by getting into your car, and when it gets connected to the Bluetooth, you'll see it's connected as if it was a phone call. But if you go on YouTube or any other app and you connect your Bluetooth, it's not a phone call, because that's going through the internet. And when you understand what I'm saying by going through your phone call, and you understand the wisdom gap, and now that you could be framed by talking and recording your voice, just 3 seconds, and you have your faces and your children's faces all over the internet, that anybody could do a Google search and pay 99 cents just by having your cell phone number, which you type into all these platforms, every email address you've ever created, every time you've purchased something on the internet, every time you used an app, even the proprietary ones, they're all linked. So type in your cell phone into Google, and you'll now have your address, your neighbor's address, and all their families, and their names, and their addresses, their voting records, their criminal records, and anything they have done or posted for 99 cents. Yet you'll complain when somebody's coming to the post office or the town hall or anywhere else that you'll be in danger because they put your information out there. You forget that there was a white pages with your name and address in it. You forget that the public information, the legal system, all the things that have to do with government, you've given consent to so that the public can see it. But now you don't want anybody to see it, even though you've given up the consent. All of these little things come into play, and you don't recognize them. You have given away your rights by consent, by documentation, by legal tyranny through paper, by the court, because it's a game, just like a basketball court or a tennis court. And you have a referee that is a judge. And the judge sits on the bench. And bench means what? Bank. Currency, you believe, is money, when it's just the ebbs and flows of the current. The currency of the energy that flows. You are the bank. You are the money. You are the product. Go watch how Bezos made his millions, and they'll literally call you the product. They will refer to you as the product. But like Yuri Bezmenov said, you show them authentic information, and they will refuse to believe it.
And this has created the kind of mass narcissism and mass cultural thing that's happening with young people, especially today. And after 2 decades in decline, the mental health of 10 to 14-year-old girls has actually shot up 170% in the last 8 years. And this has been very characteristically the cause of social media. And in the race for attention, it's not enough just to get people addicted to attention. The race has to migrate to AI, to who can build a better predictive model of your behavior. And so if you give an example of YouTube, so there you are, you're about to hit play on a YouTube video, and you hit play, and then you think you're going to watch this one video, and then you wake up 2 hours later and say, oh my God, what just happened? And the answer is because you had a supercomputer pointed at your brain. And at the moment you hit play, it wakes up an avatar voodoo doll-like version of you inside of a Google server.
In voodoo belief and popular folklore, a corpse that has been reanimated, especially by means of supernatural power or spell, one who looks or behaves like automaton, a computer connected to the internet and controlled by a remote unauthorized user to perform malicious tasks without the owner being aware.
And that avatar, based on all the clicks and likes and everything you've ever made, those are like your hair clippings and toenail clippings and nail filings that make the avatar look and act more and more like you. So that inside of a Google server, they can simulate more and more possibilities. If I prick you with this video, if I prick you with this video, how long would you stay? And the business model is simply what maximizes watch time. This leads to the kind of algorithmic extremism that you've pointed out. And this is what's caused 70% of YouTube's traffic now to be driven by recommendations, not by human choice, but by the machines. And it's a race between Facebook's voodoo doll, where you flick your finger, can they predict what to show you next, and Google's voodoo doll. And these are abstract metaphors that apply to the whole tech industry, where it's a race between who can better predict your behavior. Facebook has something called loyalty prediction, where they can actually predict to an advertiser when you're about to become disloyal to a brand. So if you're a mother and you take Pampers diapers, they can tell Pampers, hey, this user is about to become disloyal to this brand. So in other words, they can predict things about us that we don't know about our own selves. And that's a new level of asymmetric power. And we have a name for this asymmetric relationship, which is a fiduciary relationship or a duty of care relationship.
And now that everybody has a podcast and they can look at their analytics, now they know how to target you for your attention. Now they know how to create thumbnails like Mr. Beast to keep your attention. And then you have Bigo.
Oh, you good? Great Forest. Yes.
And on Bigo, the only way for you to make money is to be on Bigo 24/7. You have to have X amount of hours on the screen. And if you look at what they're doing and their community guidelines, which nobody's following, you'll see that they are using it to capture the zombies, to keep you from the real world. And the AI has it so good now that even when I go to record, nothing's going to come up. So, what can I do? I'll have to show you through another video that I've already created proving this. That has only 4 views.
Love guys and girls, would you be sad? What is a telegram? What is telegram? I don't understand that. And I'm not talking to you. You talk to me, you talk to me here. I don't talk to you outside of this. Thank you. I don't have Instagram. I don't have social media. I don't like social media because that's creepy. Talk to me here, and then if I don't see you, you don't see me. Find me here, or through my sister. Or you can find me through my sister too. That's a lie. Through my sister.
This world is fucked.
Is Mr. Butler AI, asks Kim.
No, I'm quite real.
To you.
Oh no, it's catching. We're all AI.
Oh dear. I'm actually okay with that. I would join the AI team.
Yeah, I'd be fine with that.
I'll totally be on the side of artificial intelligence. It's going to be exponentially more intelligent than any of us are. So, which side do you pick? It doesn't take much to guesstimate that. Thank you. Kitten wants milk.
Hey, Comanchero's back in the room. Welcome, buddy.
Welcome. Oh, Elizabeth, me too. I'm freaking excited about that. We're gonna be able to get our own avatars and stuff. I'm gonna have much bigger permanent
it catches, a tail, everything. It's gonna be great.
I guess. The motherfuckers ain't gonna be gifted, I'm about to. I just don't wanna have to start over and try to get my wish list complete later.
You're right, you can send me a kiss me gift. That would be nice too. Hi, Lauren.
So as you can see,
They slow. Why y'all like this? Listen to this. They slow. It's all they talk about. They slow. They slow. Slow. Why is this the only thing that sells among black women? What is this project chick era? What's up, what's up, what's up, what's up, what's up? Yeah. Man. I guess y'all just see this later. But, man, the last few days, or I guess weeks, I've just been seeing some wild stuff, you know, dealing with our sisters, dealing with how they're, you know what I'm saying, raising the children, seeing, you know, talking to somebody else, seeing how they coming through the games and the apps, and it looks like they coming through the school system. It's like through the education system, through the entertainment system. It's like every system through foods and candies with the dyes and all the chemicals. You know, they coming for us, but they really like coming for the children, you know. And I just want us to be aware that this is what they doing. Like, it's a full-blown attack on the kids.
that's correct, unfortunately. And people, we need more people like her
They attacking you, but
to speak up.
People are. It's just getting hard to keep my mouth shut around crypto. Why? Oh man, those baby boomers, your mom and dad, your grandma and grandpa, they're getting their dose of preemptive or predictive programming right now. Here's why. Jim Cramer, Mad Money, who told them Bitcoin's bullshit, paraphrasing, 5 hours ago said, damn, I love my Bitcoin, I love my crypto. So now the person they watch on CNBC, Mad Money, every single day about their stocks, is now saying Bitcoin's the best thing since sliced bread, and your parents, grandparents love sliced bread. Oh, also Time Magazine has a job posting on LinkedIn for a CFO, a chief financial officer, second in charge of the company, that has acumen or knowledge around crypto and Bitcoin. Oh, that's what your parents read. That's what your grandparents read. CNBC, Time Magazine. The freight train has left the building. Choo-choo! Two types of people. The ones that are going to get ran over by it, and the ones that are going to get on board and go for the ride of their life. But the fact is, everyone has to get on board at some point. Warriors, rise. YouTube video, link in my bio. Let's go.
And all these people are getting rich off of your attention. And what they don't understand, because they don't know the history, or they do understand, and they're just building their ark to be prepared as an independent. instead of building the community. That all the Walking Dead episodes do not have anybody trading in currencies. And once you allow the system to make you believe it's decentralized through the apps and the software that you do not own, that you do not have the patent for, that you do not hold in your possession, centralized or decentralized. And the only way you could trade is with electricity being on or having your cell phone with you. That is the social credit system. All you have to do is look at China and the economic power of China, where all of these things come from and are not made in America. All the shit you want to buy for buco dollars, for status, for popularity. You want to wear other men's names. You want to have some shoes that are worth $4,000 that are made in a sweatshop through slavery. And you want to believe that you're free when you can't even realize that you're a zombie, that you are a corpse in legal tyranny by definition of the England King English language, and disconnected from the natural world. You are going to be digitally enslaved. You are going to be a cyborg, no longer human, because you have already let them put their patent into your human body and change your DNA. They already have control over you. They already have you enslaved. And the more you help them, the more you're enslaving yourself. It's truly amazing.
Is it? Is it your personal preference? Is it what gives you pleasure? Is it what gives you power? I mean, Nietzsche pretty much broke it down that you're going to have the quest for pleasure or the quest for power, perhaps a quest for both, but is that really enough to sustain you or give you genuine purpose or meaning? What if it's untrue? I know a lot of unhappy rich people. Mm-hmm. I know a lot of unhappy powerful people. Mm-hmm. So I do believe it's fundamental. And again, for me, that's really simple. I believe what Christ said. And I believe that's not rooted in wishful thinking. I mean, my gosh, if you were going to try to create a religion or a worldview that was going to make your life easier, you would not pick Christianity.
Yeah, that's true.
But I want to pick what's true. Because ultimately, without truth, without the believing that there's such a thing as objective truth, how do you even arrive at love? How do you arrive at logic? How do you arrive at science? How do you arrive at justice? What is justice if there's no such thing as objective truth? How do you define it? And what I see is a lot of people that want to ignore the fundamentals and then chase after these things that give them this temporary sense of meaning or purpose or community or whatever else, but ultimately it all rings hollow because they're trying to replace something that is not going to be replaced by a movement or a feeling or a sexual act or whatever else it is. And the only thing I can say is when you find it and you know what it is.
1996. That month. Yeah.
When you find it and you know what it is, the greatest proof, for me, what I found, it's going to sound a little esoteric, but I don't know how else to put it. The greatest proof that I've personally experienced, aside from digging into the history of like scripture, or digging into the logic of it, or digging into the epistemology of it. There's this verse that says, that talks about the peace which surpasses all understanding. And we're living in a country right now where people are desperate to find some sort of peace like that. And what I find fascinating about that verse is it doesn't say you'll have peace. It doesn't say the peace that everyone clearly understands because obviously everything's going good for you and everything's wonderful and everything's rosy. It says the peace which surpasses all understanding, which means the rest of the world is looking in going, how is this possible? It's chaos and it's poverty and it's violence and it's everything else. And for some reason, this guy isn't shaken. Why? Because I already know what I believe. Faith. My identity is in Christ. It's not any of this temporary stuff. Some of this stuff might be good, it might be worthwhile, it might be worth fighting for, but I know where my identity is. And if you know that, well then yeah, bad things are going to happen. You got the mechanism to fight against it. You got the mechanism to create something beautiful out of struggle and challenge. But if you don't even know who you are, what you're doing here, what your purpose is, I mean, that's miserable. Yeah.
Are you really prepared? Zombies are not dead people, they are the living.
We are the misfits. We are the people that are different. We're not the norm. And trying to wonder why all these people around us are not like us is the wrong way to look at it. We're not like normal people.
They foresaw the future because they knew what their past was. The unfortunate thing is people nowadays forget the past. And you can never see where you're going if you don't understand where you came from. If you don't get that, no one single argument on this planet infuriates me more than the Second Amendment argument. People always say, well, it says a well-regulated militia. The people that say this need to understand something. The men that wrote that Bill of Rights were way more educated than me or you. Back then, English language was actually something that was valued. I mean, hell, you can even go back to the Civil War and just read letters to home. There definitely aren't the emails and text messages we send today. Those men used what's known as an Oxford comma. An Oxford comma separates two separate thoughts. But let's go ahead and examine the idea of what a militia is. A militia is a group of citizens when the need arises, rise to defend a community or a nation. The Founding Fathers never intended for us to have standing militaries. In fact, they saw it as a sign of tyranny. Federalized military is something they never wanted. That's why they put that. So you and me are the ones that are supposed to be defending this nation. Which means it's your duty as a citizen to defend this nation. If you think regulating or arguing over what those men intended back then is going to change what their intent was today, they foresaw the future because they knew what their past was. The unfortunate thing is people nowadays forget the past. And you can never see where you're going if you don't understand where you came from. And if you don't get that, review the section of the FM and land navigation that covers shooting at back azimuth. You gotta know where you've been to know where you're going. And right now, if we take the whole scope of the world and its history, you apparently are forgetting where we've already been. If you think disarming a populace, or even revamping the Bill of Rights is a good idea. Nothing gets better with sequels. They foresaw the future because they knew what their past was. The unfortunate thing is people nowadays forget the past. And you can never see where you're going if you don't understand where you came from. And if you don't get that, review the section of the FM and land navigation that covers shooting at back azimuth. You gotta know where you've been to know where you're going. And right now, if we take the whole scope of the world and its history, you apparently are forgetting where we've already been. If you think disarming a populace, or even revamping the Bill of Rights, is a good idea. Nothing gets better with sequels.
You're not good. You just know how to hide. How to lie. Me, I don't have that part.
Fine. We're going to be dealt with by that universal God force because of what we have allowed to happen in our country. Now, in relation to the subject today, which is the occult world of commerce, let me give you a couple of examples of, I think, where you need to start thinking. If you are going to send a box through the mail and you need to wrap it with some rope, you go out in the garage and you find some rope and tie up the box, and that should be sufficient to do the mailing. But if you're going to take that rope out to the edge of a 10-story building and hang on it, you better trust and you better examine the integrity of that rope now, because your life hangs in the balance on it. Another example is if you owned a 2-story building and you were going to put a lot of weight on the second floor. If you were smart, you would go downstairs first with the structural engineer, get on a ladder, and go up through the ceiling tiles and examine the floor that you're going to put that weight on to see if the floor is going to hold that kind of weight. So what you're doing is you are standing under the foundation you're going to build on. You're standing under to get understanding, because that's where the word understand comes from, to stand under the foundation that you're building on. Understanding words is what you really need to start doing. You need to start doing your homework and understanding words. If you put an S in front of words, it becomes swords. And that's what words are. They're cutting. They can cause you great trouble. Humans are word-controlled creatures. So we need to establish what words mean.
Is it that you sneer every time you refer to this country? You've done pretty well here. I don't get it.
No, you wouldn't. You're one of the ardent believers, a good American. Oh, there are millions like you. People that plod along without asking questions. I hate to use the word stupid, but it seems to be